This story could have begun like many tales of the battle of humans with demons. At the decisive moment, a hero always appeared, defeating evil, ensuring the superiority of humanity. And no matter how hard the Demon King tried to overcome such a fierce confrontation, it was all in vain. Both opponents died in a duel, only to meet again in their new incarnations. After which peace was established on Earth for 100 years. Today's story differs from thousands of similar ones in what happened next in Hell. One terrifying day, a messenger reported to the Prince of Darkness that the Demiurge had disappeared. The 666th attempt to revive the Demon King was on the verge of failure. The young man, who was raised under strict supervision, suddenly ran away, renouncing his title. In the letter he left behind, the boy indicated that he did not want to become an instrument of revenge. The Demiurge's dream was to break out of his infernal prison and see the world. After wandering among humans for a while, the hope of the demon race arrived in the kingdom of Verde. The boy liked what he saw around him. The world of people was beautiful, unlike hell. It was even easier to breathe amidst such impressive views. Only humanity's faith in God was disturbing. The crosses around were incredibly annoying. Demiurge's thoughts were interrupted by guards who were rapidly approaching in order to find out who he was. For some reason, these two brazen soldiers thought they were dealing with an ordinary peasant, and they persistently demanded that the stranger identify himself. The young man was not stupid and understood that he could not be called by his real name. So I decided to change it up a bit. From now on, the king of demons in the human world was called Deorg. But as soon as the word left his lips, the newcomer received a dose of anger in return. Count Bruo joined the company, demanding to stop mocking the name of the ancient god. But the Demon King was not impressed by his appearance at all. The boy was more interested in whether the kingdom he was visiting was strong. Because of the resistance he encountered, the young man's desire to destroy awoke. He wanted to choose a worthy place for himself on Earth, where he could rule. And he immediately eliminated anyone who disagreed with this position. The Count's head exploded right before the eyes of his subordinates, and its remains scattered among those around him. The same fate befell the rest of the guards. One by one, they exploded like balloons. The Durg had no intention of stopping, until he took the lives of everyone who stood in his way in front of the main gate. Seeing the incredible human losses from the wall, the archers tried to attack the stranger. To their surprise, the young man didn't even bat an eye, even though he saw a cloud of arrows flying in his direction. None of them touched his body. And the archers, having openly entered into confrontation, were deprived of their lives. When it was all over, Durg ordered the remains of the slain to stand and bow to their lord. Together with his so-called subjects, the boy headed towards the main gate of the fortress. The warriors, who at that time were hastily lining up on the other side, did not understand who had attacked them. When the gate exploded and the people saw that there was one person standing on the other side, they were even more scared. The Demon King wasn't going to talk this time. He decided to show his opponent some of his power so as not to waste time suppressing resistance. Everything around the boy was rapidly turning into a mixture of human bones and flesh. The warriors begged for mercy and to spare their lives. But Durg remained relentless. On the contrary, he liked the accompaniment of loud mass suffering. Suddenly, amidst the cacophony of sounds, he heard a prayer. The knight, who was still unharmed, begged God to have mercy on the people. The man was completely immersed in this process, acquiring a powerful aura through his faith. The knight understood that he was the last bastion of resistance and had to prevent the attack of evil. He believed that his bit of pure blood would help him win. The Demon King was delighted that he was able to find the carrier of the hero gene almost immediately. For the first time, the boy saw with his own eyes the radiant aura of goodness. The knight, having delivered a somewhat pompous speech, rushed into the attack. He understood perfectly well that he was not a direct descendant of the hero, but he felt immense strength within himself. With all the power possible, the man struck his opponent with his sword. But Durg effortlessly stopped the blade with his fingers. In front of the stunned knight, the boy also began to pray. But about killing your opponent. This was a mockery of the highest order, a desecration of the unshakable faith in the holiness of the Chosen One. With one sharp movement, the Demon King ripped out the man's heart. The knight saw his opponent squeeze his organ in his hand with a ruthless smile. Everything was over, and it was time to go to King Verde. When the young man entered the throne room, everyone was surprised that there was no army with him. The proud ruler, sitting on the throne, inquired about the identity of the newcomer. But he, laughing, ignored his question. Some knights rushed to defend the honor of the Lord, for which they immediately paid with their lives. Silence fell in the hall. Everyone realized that they were not dealing with an ordinary person. The Dorg suddenly spread its wings and soared upward. Having flown through all the armed soldiers without any problems, in an instant, he found himself dangerously close to King Verde. Enjoying the old man's fright, the young man said that he wanted to seize his possessions. After hearing this, the old man's fear for his own life was replaced by indignation and greed. But Durg explained that, in case of refusal, death awaited all members of the royal family. To somehow change the guest's anger to mercy, the man offered him his daughter, and the possibility of solving the problem without deaths. But the new ruler of hell did not want to change his plans. This behavior of the demon made the old man completely lose control of himself. He tried to clearly define his rights to ownership, but it was all in vain. And no matter how hard the man tries to prove that Verde belongs to his family and will always be so, the Daewurg had his own vision of eternity. The guy wanted changeability of power in this fortress. The mention of the saints worshipped by humanity prompted the young man to take active action. He caused a powerful explosion with a smile, who destroyed the main dome of the throne room, crowned with a cross, which he did not like from the beginning. The flames around greedily consumed everyone inside. The demiurge watched as people turned to ash in seconds, including the old king, who, due to his greed, never abdicated the throne. For some reason, the excitement from the first executions disappeared somewhere, and the demon became bored. It turned out that in such a glorious and powerful kingdom, there were no worthy warriors. The king of hell even turned to God and remarked in surprise that he was doing his job poorly. But this remark remained a monologue. The fulfillment of the prophecy was inevitable, just like all 665 times before. Durg's fate was to be decided in 20 years, and for now, the boy had a chance to outdo the hero. The deliberations over further actions regarding the search for the hero were interrupted by a cry of despair. This was the same daughter of the ruler of Verde, whom he wanted to give to the king of hell. It should be noted that the young man did find the girl's appearance attractive. Meanwhile, the princess demanded an explanation for her father's horrific execution. The Durg tried to remember her name, which King Verde had shouted to him in the midst of an argument. He seemed to call the girl April. Since she was quite attractive, the demon had already begun making plans for marriage. Thus, it was possible to seize the throne of the kingdom in a completely organic way. But April was not thrilled with the dangerous stranger's plan. Therefore, the demiurge had to use coercive force against the future bride. Of course, this immediately made the princess submissive and willing to do whatever her lord wanted. As soon as the words of consent left her lips, the young man immediately approached the beauty. He wanted to take a closer look at his first asset in the human world. Approaching the girl aroused feelings in the boy that he had never known before. But at the same time as he wanted intimacy, he was annoyed that her reaction was a consequence of the force used. The dialogue was interrupted by the sudden appearance of an uninvited guest. It was Alex, the demon mentor of the King of Hell. This time, he politely greeted the young man as a humble servant. Frankly, the guy thought he had covered his tracks well before, so now he was upset. And no matter what Alex told him, the guy perfectly understood the true motives of all the inhabitants of hell. The demon, meanwhile, continued to assure that he obeyed the Durgus with every cell of his body. Unable to withstand the ostentatious flattery, the young man immediately announced that his decision to escape was final. He expected this to spark a new controversy, but the opposite happened. Alex unexpectedly agreed with the ruler's decision and even encouraged more active action. The demon wanted the king to impregnate Princess Verde as soon as possible and give birth to an heir. To enhance the manipulation effect, Alex even mentioned his role in raising the boy. From breastfeeding and temporary gender reassignment, to learning the basics of demonic power and essence, and ultimately, the transfer to the Egg of Awakening, in which the young man was to remain for 100 years. Now, like a nursing mother once did, Alex rejoiced at the rapid growth of his ward. And he was absolutely not against the boy remaining among people. This caused even more negativity from the interlocutor, who understood that this was another trick. But the demon continued to praise the young man's abilities and his desire for power. The ways to achieve the desired were also not subject to any criticism. In Alex's opinion, Durg acted absolutely naturally according to his calling. Almost immediately after arriving in the human world, he sowed chaos and mass deaths. Everything that happened was the kind of theft the demons expected from their master. With every word of his mentor, pride in himself filled the young man more and more. Therefore, the announcement of the king's descendant being banished to hell was a cold shower for the boy. In this way, Alex wanted to get out of an awkward situation without disrupting the plans of hell. In that case, in 20 years they could raise a new demon ruler. And then humanity will again face a bloody war, thanks to which all the failures of evil will remain in the past. Hearing this perspective, Durg realized that he had almost fallen into a trap. Alex tried to dazzle and fool the boy with the beauty of the princess. The king of hell had to be more careful about all his actions from now on. The prospect of a settled life in the kingdom of Verde receded into the background. The demon's dreams of the demiurge's descendants were as unfulfilled as the young man's attack was powerful. Alex paid for his long tongue. Of course, this scared him. Therefore, the mentor decided to tactically remain silent and wait for his mentee's violent reaction. And it seemed like he wasn't going to stop. He was completely unlike all his predecessors, extremely strong and unpredictable. Combined with extraordinary intelligence, this ruler could be the key to victory in the upcoming battle. Alex was immersed in his own observations. Durg had already built a new strategy. He wanted to be the first to find a hero instead of living, not yearning in a half-destroyed kingdom. But not to kill, but to become his invisible assistant. The young man considered confrontation with people much more destructive than a cunning way to profit at the expense of the enemy. These statements made Alex howl in despair. It turned out that the guy's intelligence was greatly overestimated. But the conversation ended before the mentor could object, and Durg set off on his journey. The king of hell had no idea that a dangerous enemy was already watching him. Escape to the human world was in the hands of the dragon goddess. The woman was tired of peaceful existence next to her enemies. She sought to borrow the boy's strength to win the great battle she planned to start. Obviously, Alex didn't want to leave his ward alone. Therefore, he wandered around as a coachman, sitting in a horse-drawn cart. The Durg was resting behind in the hay, yawning lazily. He didn't want to move around thanks to his abilities. Preferring a more human way of existence, no one was supposed to know they were here. Even the fire in the Verde Palace was not as obvious as the flight of winged representatives of hell. Alex had to come to terms with the wishes of the Overlord, whose plan he still couldn't understand. The Durg wanted to remain in the hero's shadow while he dealt with the monsters for the next 20 years. But first, the unknown had to be found. On the way, the Demon King decided to ask his mentor how the human world works. Is there a rank system among their warriors? Alex had to explain everything he knew about this. The best rank on Earth was considered D, Dragon Slayer. The Durg immediately perked up, thinking that it was so easy to find a warlike monster with wings somewhere. But the mentor explained that now neutrality reigns between these two races. Therefore, most likely, the maximum is rank G, Giant Killer. The rank of Lich Slayer was also available. These are the only categories worth noting. Category F was considered the most shameful. These were absolute losers among the heroes. They were despised by everyone around them, despite having a shred of pure blood. If everything was good with rank, one could achieve remarkable heights and success in human society. For demons, ranks had no meaning at all. The main thing was the purity of blood. Direct descendants of the first saviors of the world, the hero and the priestess were considered more dangerous to evil. The holy blood was capable of destroying the king of hell and had done so successfully many hundreds of times. However, rank and blood were not always proportional to each other, oddly enough. In the end, the conversation about the peculiarities of human nature tired the young ruler. He still couldn't accept his fate because someone once didn't find a common language. And although Alex insisted that it was a promise, the young man did not want to be a weapon in the hands of others. Moving through such a beautiful place. The boy only thought about the need to admire what surrounded him and not think about the war. Suddenly, he saw a butterfly next to him and became interested in it. The creature was truly incredibly fragile and beautiful. I wanted to touch the insect and understand how it came into being. And when a cool breeze blew through the field, the young man became interested in this incredible phenomenon. Rocking on invisible waves, the butterfly flew into the distance. The Durgas could only sigh about this and complain about his ruined hairdo. He was like a young chamukka, amazed by everything he saw around him. Even the sun, which blinded him through his fingers with its bright glow. The guy understood that Alex was here not for the first time and could tell a lot of interesting things. He was one of the 7 dukes of the demon world. Therefore, he was born after the first great battle with the mission of reviving the glory of hell. Every 100 years, the young man's mentor could observe such extraordinary views, which made Demiurge jealous. He also wanted to be just as free in his choices. The guy was pleased that he managed to escape and was now here. Otherwise, he would not have seen and felt how beautiful peace can be. Now, the Demon King felt happy for the first time in his life. And this greatly disturbed Alex, who watched him, trying to understand his ward's train of thought. After a few minutes, exhausted by intense observations, the young man announced that he wanted to sleep. Before doing this, explain clearly to your fellow traveler that he should not move against his will. Because in that case, the demons will see to it that they are both destroyed. But the warnings were unnecessary, because Alex himself understood that it was illogical to do so. A few hours later, the mentor stirred up the young man at the entrance to a village. It was a fairly quiet place called Zorix, where absolutely nothing was happening. At first glance, Durg liked what he saw. The guy was most interested in the presence of heroes in Zorix. There were representatives of A and F ranks present. The most powerful class of dragon fighters was not observed nearby. These were rare enough, capable warriors who could be counted on the fingers of one hand. The extraordinary power of these people frightened demons and forced them to move on the earth with caution. Suddenly, Durg heard snippets of conversation about a dragon attack on the local palace. People were seriously discussing this case, which, according to Alex, was impossible. Returning to his mentor with his complaints, the boy saw that he was also surprised by what he heard. During the years of absence from Earth, many things had changed, which now needed to be explored in greater depth. After wandering the streets for a while, the travelers stopped at one of the village's hotels. Just like at the gates of the Verde Kingdom, they were treated like beggars here. And although Alex booked a penthouse for his host at the reception, this only caused contemptuous laughter from the interlocutor. The demon had to prove his solvency with treasures from the palace of the Verde Kingdom. The attitude towards the newcomers changed instantly. A boy named Moodin, whom everyone called an asshole for some reason, was already nimbly running towards the guests. He was a local doorman trying his best to make a living. The young man politely offered to pick up the residents' belongings, introducing himself as Aiden. Within seconds, the 3 of them were climbing the narrow hotel stairs. Along the way, the young man tried to reassure the guests about the news about the dragon. In his opinion, they shouldn't have to live in such luxurious apartments under the protection of A rank. During the short conversation, Durg managed to understand that this person was quite friendly, and most importantly, it was suitable for his purposes. At the moment of meeting, the Demon King already realized that the boy had pure blood. But he could not independently determine what rank was in front of him. So deciding to build on Aiden's position, Durg assumed the guy had an F rank. The young man's theory turned out to be correct. The receptionist admitted his rightness, blushing shyly. But suddenly, the conversation was interrupted by a terrible noise and flames. It was the work of the dragon's claws. A giant flying lizard destroyed a luxurious penthouse and stared at the 3 interlocutors. The village caught fire, and the locals tried to save their lives by fleeing. Aiden also encouraged hotel guests to save their lives. But they noted that, despite the unexpected intervention, it was necessary to remain calm. The Demon King offered the boy his help. He wanted to create a hero out of the receptionist. Since the circumstances were perfect, the young man had to accept this extraordinary offer. From the moment of victory over such a creature, life in shame will immediately end. The dirge skillfully played on the feelings and pride of a man in need. Aiden immediately remembered his poor and hungry childhood. Under the influence of these memories, he fell to his knees and began to beg for help, promising humility. The young man even promised to lay down his soul for this if necessary. And the Demon King liked it incredibly. In Durg's imagination, everything was now shaping up as best for the implementation of his plan. He decided to seal the deal and offered Aiden a deal. After reading the terms, the young receptionist was outraged by the unfair distribution of rights in their relationship. But the King of Hell was relentless. He demanded the name of the other party to be signed. Realizing that a bleak future and wealth and fame hung in the balance, Aiden still hesitated. He sensed a pitfall in the sweet promises of new acquaintances. But the desire to change my life prevailed. When the deal was made, Durg pointed the boy to the first target, the mad dragon in front of them. But Alex quickly intervened in the dialogue, noting that humans are not as powerful as demons. Therefore, the tactics were changed radically. Aiden was to be used as a screen. The main work was to be done by the mentor of the King of Hell. The porter could only wait for the dragon to fall to the ground and pretend that it was his handiwork. With the help of Alex's extraordinary cunning, it was easy to pull off such an operation. This way, none of the observers would be able to guess the brazen fraud. The problem remained the constant presence of the Daorg next to the hero, which could raise many questions. Therefore, the young King of Hell decided to hide Aiden's identity behind a costume. Since there was no time to search for resources, the boy simply took off his ward's clothes and made a cloak out of them. And as a mask, he used a saucepan that was standing nearby, having previously burned holes in it for the eyes. Although the receptionist's appearance was not entirely adequate by human standards, it was better than revealing his identity. Having agreed on the minor nuances, Alex set out to conquer the restless dragon. Seeing things spiraling rapidly, Aiden felt fear. Cold sweat trickled down his entire body in anticipation of failure in front of the villagers. Understanding that this way a guy might refuse to go out in public at all, the Durg threw him a floor-sweeping brush as a weapon, calling it a sacred sword. And within a second, something extremely strange happened. While the Demon King continued his pleas for compliance with the terms of the agreement, Aiden felt something extremely powerful. The young man had a destructive motivation to tear his opponent to shreds. He was confident in the success of all his endeavors on the battlefield, something that had never happened in his entire life. The porter had no idea that deep down in his soul, such a powerful call for pure blood could rage. Observing his interlocutor, Durg immediately noticed changes in him. This indicated that the chosen candidate was not so hopeless for the role of hero. Turning 180 degrees, the young man quickly ran into the square, waiting for the winged lizard. At this time, his fellow villagers, terrified, were still trying to find shelter among the burning buildings. The dragon spewed flames, not going to stop terrorizing the population. He flew like a madman over people, terrifying them with his mere appearance. Alex chose a good moment to appear. He teleported to the cross of the village church when the monster was already approaching there. As he was about to attack, the demon suddenly noticed something strange. The flying monster seemed to be possessed by some kind of power or spell. Alex decided that he could handle such an opponent in any case. Jumping up and following an arcuate trajectory, the demon found himself above the dragon. The landing on the monster's back was successful. Alex began to hit the dragon with countless blows, and in the end, he managed to break through the strong scales, reaching the desired heart. He wrapped his hands around the organ like a strong vice, squeezing it tighter and tighter. From now on, under threat of death, the dragon had to obey the demon's demands, and so it was interesting to know why two neutral races suddenly began to be at war again. But instead of an answer, Alex saw a hostile entity beginning to seep through the scales. The dragon suddenly began to speak in an ancient language that he was not supposed to know, which made the demon tense up even more. He felt some kind of trap in this whole situation. The enemies flew together rapidly, further and further away from the ground. Meanwhile, Aiden finally stepped onto the field, practically in what his mother had given birth to him in. The villagers saw an unknown strange guy and began to discuss him. They didn't understand who he was and why he wasn't at all afraid of the terrible monster flying outside. The unknown person didn't look like a hero at all, given his appearance, more like a pervert. And only Durgus, among all this crowd of observers, supported his ward. Thanks to his loud cries about the hero, others gradually began to cheer the boy on. This prompted Aiden to focus more on the upcoming battle and believe in his own strength again. Meanwhile, above ground, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. None of the opponents were going to surrender their positions or submit to anyone. Alex realized that he needed to immediately increase the pressure. With the help of 100 demonic hands, he tried to grab the dragon's body in a vice. At first glance, it seemed that the attack was going well, the monster growling helplessly. When the resistance was finally broken, the demon decided to move on to the final chord. He pierced the monster's heart with a sharp movement of one of his hands. A deafening scream of pain rang out. And at that very moment, an unknown substance seized the limb of the mentor of the King of Hell. Through this touch, the demon was finally able to understand what the adversary was saying. It was about someone dead who was resurrected. And this dangerous former dead man was soon to emerge from the darkness onto the scene. Hypnotizing Alex with conversation, the magical substance took him more and more under its control. On Earth, Durg couldn't understand why his mentor was taking so long to mess with some lizard. He gradually began to get bored, but he could not abandon the matter without bringing it to an end. Alex continued to resist. And in the end, he was able to change the dragon's trajectory, and it began to descend rapidly, heading towards the village. Seizing this moment, the King of Hell ordered his charge to prepare. The guy shouldn't have missed the moment to act. At his mentor's command, Aiden stepped forward, despite the fear of the killer that was rushing towards him. After a few seconds, it became clear that the dragon was not going to stop or slow down. The porter began to plead for support, but Durg only smiled in response. Of course, he did not wish for the death of the young man who was beneficial to him. The unexpected surge of self-confidence, due to the property of pure blood, did its job. Aiden aimed his makeshift sword at his opponent, preparing to use the only technique he knew. At this time, Alex is still trying to get rid of the unknown substance that is trying to take over him. Gradually, the entity reached even his brain, causing great suffering. This powerful opponent even gained the upper hand at some point. But with immense willpower, the demon nevertheless found the strength to confront the new thirst. When Alex managed to get rid of some of the pressure, he saw the full danger of his situation. Riding a dragon, he was rapidly approaching the main square of the village, where Aiden was. It was necessary to urgently settle the monster in order to adhere to the original plan. With the help of 1,000 strikes of light, the demon managed to alleviate his condition. Having freed his hands, he finally reached the moment when he could tear his opponent away from his face. The dragon was still rapidly approaching the ground, unable to slow down. The Dorg himself understood that this was absolutely not conducive to the success of the plan he had devised. He couldn't see that Alex had been literally fighting for his existence all this time. A clash with the village seemed inevitable. Aiden was shaking all over, but he couldn't bring himself to move, despite all the calls to flee from the surrounding buildings. The small number of people who were still watching what was happening fled to shelters. Even Deorg rushed to the aid of the boy, who was in danger through his fault. The King of Hell prepared to repel the attack as a last resort, hoping that there would be no witnesses. Alex, in turn, also did everything in his power to avoid disaster. Aiden stood in a stance, while the dragon opened its mouth, preparing to spit flames. The young man could only think about how he would win this, his first real duel. He recalled his training sessions with his father as a child. The man then taught him the moonlight technique, preparing the toddler for the invasion of the Demon King. Although everyone around them considered them absolute losers, Dad always said that wasn't true. He believed that a drop of pure blood could work miracles, and his son would become a hero. Therefore, I devoted a lot of time to teaching him martial arts. And Aiden really liked it, because in those moments the boy felt the love and care of his family. And so the years passed, and moonlight in the performance of the brush became the first technique he used. At that very moment, the Dorg activated his power of fatal punishment. These two counterattacks merged together, united by the powerful auras of their masters. The giant monster had no chance of survival. The dragon fell to the ground, right at the feet of the former receptionist, destroying several buildings that stood around the square. When it was all over, Aiden opened his mouth in shock. He did not expect this case to be successful for him. Of course, Demiurge was no longer around, so all the attention of those around him was focused on the new human hero. And the plan worked. From every window of the damaged buildings of the village, residents gradually began to praise the savior. It was the first time Aiden had heard so many flattering words addressed to him. He looked around in confusion, standing still, until his mentor shouted for him to run. It was necessary to hide from prying eyes as quickly as possible to avoid detection. Recovering from his state of shock, the receptionist ran headlong into the alley. While Alex, still not fully recovered from what had happened, watched everything from above. He couldn't stop thinking about what the monster had said during the flight. The eerie prophecy needed to be investigated more carefully. The next morning, Durg, satisfied with the operation performed the day before, got out of bed. A moment after opening his eyes, the young man saw Alex in front of him with a cup of coffee. Today, the former mentor looked like a waiter, observing all the human traditions of service. The idyll was interrupted by the appearance of a dirty and sweaty Aiden, who burst into the hotel room. The young man was happy that on every corner of the village, everyone remembered his heroic deed. He wasn't even bothered by the fact that none of the residents understood who was hiding under the ridiculous costume. Today, the guy was worried about where to make money, and had already joined in clearing away the rubble. Even a half-destroyed penthouse couldn't ruin Durg's good mood today. You could say the opposite. He liked waking up under the open sky. Meanwhile, work had been in full swing in Zorix for several hours. Those who had any status did not stop trying to disparage Aiden in some way. Watching his charge being mocked, Durg could only wonder. The young man's steadfastness was perceived by the King of Hell as foolishness and weakness. But judging by Alex's stories about the receptionist, the guy has been just trying to feed his family his whole life. He took on any job that could make life a little easier for his family. And this rehabilitated Aiden in the eyes of Durg as a persistent and hard-working candidate. He decided that this place was quite suitable for the implementation of a grandiose multi-year plan. And the receptionist himself was the perfect fit for his role. It was easy to work with this material. The village and nature around Zorix also pleased the young ruler. He wholeheartedly, if I may say so, aspired to spend his human life here. But for this to happen, something had to be done first. Surprised, Alex didn't understand where Durg had gone. As it turned out, the King of Hell sought to sell the artifacts left over from the dragon. Therefore, the demon had to explain to the newcomer to this world that the Hero Bureau had already liquidated everything. The guy immediately lost control of his emotions at this news. The efforts made were of no use to them, so it was necessary to fix this immediately. The Dorg sought to completely eliminate the Hero Bureau and do so immediately. Alex barely managed to stop him halfway. It was impossible for the two of them to stand up to a whole galaxy of pure-blooded people. Especially if the plan was to raise our own, that very warrior. It was necessary to first register him as a member of this very bureau. Observing these countless rules and instructions tired the young man. But he couldn't abandon his idea at the beginning, so he agreed to change his anger to mercy. Pride did not allow them to sit among people completely without money, so it was decided to attack their neighbors. Expressing his dissatisfaction along the way, Alex obediently drove the cart a few minutes later. The demon did not want to give up trying to convert the ruler to the true path of returning home, so I kept pestering the boy with the same questions about it. He couldn't understand why he was wasting time doing incomprehensible things. Only 20 years remained until the hour of X, but Dorg was not going to dance to someone else's tune during this time. All the arguments of the interlocutor did not in any way bother the wayward young man. He insisted that from now on, hell has no king. And regarding the descendants who could have been raised in his place, he ordered them to forget about it completely. Alex couldn't return home empty-handed, so he was forced to stay with Dorg. Although I would gladly strangle this restless, freedom-loving boy. He decided to act cunningly and arrange romantic moments in the process, thinking that one day the tactic might work and bear the desired fruit. In the course of a casual conversation, it became clear that Dorg knew nothing about the peculiarities of his body. He believed that it was impossible for a person to become pregnant by a demon. But it turned out that everything was just the opposite. Alex had to explain some points about the human reproductive system, which were almost indistinguishable from the features of their world. Therefore, on this path, everything depended only on the desire of the King of Hell himself. His body was designed in such a way that even a kiss with a woman provoked fertilization, which in the boy's eyes was barbaric because it deprived him of the slightest contact with women. Shocked by what he heard, Dorg lay down, not wanting to continue the conversation any longer. He saw no blessing in having such characteristics. This was the torment that the next candidate was forced to live through every 100 years. The King of Hell felt at that moment the great pressure of the nation's hopes placed upon him. According to the laws of the genre, this conversation was interrupted by the appearance of unexpected guests. Some people were running towards the cart from afar. Looking into the horizon, the young man realized that robbers were chasing a woman, and when she saw the men driving by, she apparently began to beg them for help. Alex was the first to break the silence, offering to help the victim. But Dorg regarded this with suspicion. The guy assumed that this was the work of his former mentor, in the context of the conversation that took place. He did not want to enter into another conflict without good reasons and arguments. Human problems related to women were no longer on his list of priorities. Alex began to assure me that this was none of his business. The beautiful stranger, meanwhile, had already reached the cart. She began to beg Dorg again for help, telling him that she was being pursued by bandits. He tried to find several excuses to avoid interference, but the pleas did not stop. On the contrary, they became even stronger, and everything was complemented by tears. And from that moment on, no matter how the young man tried to get out of it, the dialogue was tied together with a strong rope. The stranger had hurt the ego of the King of Hell, and he couldn't just leave it like that. The guy wanted a vendetta about this, and was already preparing for another verbal attack. But the argument was interrupted by an axe that damaged the body of the cart, getting stuck in it. The robbers, who had already caught up with their target, smiled predatorily, mocking their new potential victims. This became a motive for Dorg to forget his newly established principles. With a desire to burn the villains in hell, he used his power against them. A hellish flame flared up around the bandits, which was not going to go out. Everyone who was not affected was frozen in horror. The terrible punishment was designed to preserve the victim's life, but add to the existence of terrible torment. It worked like a cold shower for the rest of the robbers, who scattered. Only the girl remained near the cart, and she finally smiled. When the danger for her passed, the stranger immediately began to beg to intervene in another story. It was necessary to free the mountain temple from the clutches of bloodthirsty bandits. The Dorg, of course, did not seek to do this. He ordered Alex to drive on, paying no further attention to the woman. Everything changed when the girl started bragging about a nice reward, a golden helmet for the rescue. Climbing the few steps up the mountain, Alex was already dissatisfied with the Lord's decision. He didn't understand why they needed to climb on their own too. If you can just fly to the mountain in a few seconds without any problems. But Dorg wanted to follow the example of their leader, who easily overcame all the obstacles ahead. He didn't understand that for a human, such agility was even more suspicious. For half an hour, the girl just ran ahead, not stopping for a moment. While the demon under the feet of the King of Hell almost died of fatigue. The Dorg was confident in his superiority, so he wasn't too worried about the identity of the guide. He was sure that he could easily overcome it, The main thing was the reward. The temple they were going to was built in honor of the golden dragon god. He was considered the supreme ruler of this nation. In general, demons, humans, and dragons had similar beliefs regarding the creation of the world. But the first believed that it was possible to lure the deity to their side. With the capture of the main human citadel on Earth, they sought to do this many hundreds of times. Finally, the summit was reached, and Alex, exhausted, collapsed onto the road. This did not bother his companion at all. The young man simply stepped over the exhausted man. He was only aiming for the entrance to the temple. The guy understood that the faster he coped with the task, the sooner he would receive the helmet. But his former mentor quickly realized that this was another trap. They fell under the influence of the spell of the goddess herself, the golden dragon. The Diurg, not understanding what was really happening, initially decided that the woman was a robber. And this incredibly outraged the interlocutor. She demanded humility and an apology. After her status was stated out loud, conversation stopped for a moment. Alex broke the silence by asking the King of Hell to leave this temple immediately. The girl, seeing the fear in the demon's eyes, decided to assert her advantage. For some reason, she thought that she was facing ordinary mortals who were not capable of defeating her. But Durg showed her no respect at all, displaying his usual arrogance. He and his companion began to talk about her in a disparaging manner. The golden dragon became even angrier. She was ready for open confrontation. The young man, in response, pretended not to understand what was being said at all. The cause of the problem between the two parties was the killing of a dragon in the village. The woman assured that this was her precious child, and the criminals should be punished for it. The goddess threatened the boy and his henchmen with death. In her temple, she felt the fullness of authority and boundless power. She didn't realize that she was facing the King of Hell himself, and she demanded obedience, rejoicing at how Alex writhed in fear. Instead, Demirj decided that it was time to stop talking and showed his true nature. He began to threaten the interlocutor with retaliation, and demanded an apology for the lie and the spectacle she had put on. The guy was climbing up to the temple to receive a reward and was annoyed that he had been tricked. The golden dragon's first reaction was indignation. She was caught off guard. The Durg began to present arguments regarding his rightness, regarding the legality of protecting life from the dragon. The people in the village didn't attack first, and he himself was just helping them survive. Instead of understanding, now in the temple the boy faced condemnation for this. This encouraged the King of Hell to teach a lesson to the defiant dragons, even if they were gods. Quickly orienting himself in the situation, Alex supported the owner, adding even more pressure on his opponent. With the cunning of an ancient demon, he tipped the scales in favor of humans. Together, the two companions attacked the goddess, who had to defend herself in embarrassment. The lecture continued until it became obvious that the woman was starting to break down. The golden dragon sharply explained her point of view regarding children. She did not want to be held responsible for the actions of other members of her species. And in general, the goddess did not understand how it happened that from a position of strength, she found herself so weak in an instant. Seeing that the interlocutors decided to leave, she suddenly stopped them halfway. The girl begged to hear important information. Since the response was ignoring, the golden dragon decided to apologize. This really had the desired effect, and the visitors were ready to listen to her. In his characteristic manner, Durg finally decided to mock his interlocutor. He behaved like a father praising his daughter for some success. It turned out that the goddess wanted to catch one of her sons and accomplish this with their help. This surprised the demons. The King of Hell thought this was some new trick. He wasn't going to indulge in such a trick again. But Alex quickly realized that the target was most likely also possessed by the parasite. He had contact with the purple substance and had a good idea of what they would be dealing with. The goddess confirmed the demon's suspicions. She emphasized that her son was the victim, not the aggressor. Someone, dissatisfied with neutrality, has united in a coalition against the people. And now he was involving dragons in this cause, who had lost their loved ones in the war with the latter. The conspirators, blinded by hatred, had to be stopped at all costs. And the goddess begged for help from outside forces to solve this looming problem. After listening to the Golden Dragon's arguments, the demons pondered the advisability of their participation. At first glance, the woman was quite sincere in her explanations and didn't mean anything bad. But Durg was primarily interested in the reward he could receive for his efforts. The guy didn't want to waste his time just like that. It was a good chance to earn money to implement my own plans. He wanted to receive 5 dragon scales as salary. They could cover all the expenses of living in Zorix because they cost a lot of money. The Golden Dragon was shocked by such an unexpected demand. Now it was her turn to feel that the trap had been prepared well in advance. With a familiar gesture, the Durg rolled out a new contract in front of the girl, which she had to agree to. He explained that simply giving your name in response would be considered an agreement to the arrangement. But the cunning goddess herself knew this perfectly well. After hesitating for about half a minute, she finally approved the contract. And the King of Hell smiled contentedly. The reward was almost in his pocket. Durg and Alex turned to leave the temple. The Dragon Queen didn't just want to neutralize her son, she wanted to get him alive. The young man only smiled in response to this demand, which posed no problem. The demons calmly left the temple, discussing what had happened and their impressions of the meeting. At some point, the young man rushed back, remembering that he had never received what he had been promised. The helmet that the boy shouted at the empty cave about was out of reach today. The Golden Dragon has already hidden its true location, leaving behind only ruins. The angry Durg stood there, raging and stamping his feet, seeking justice. Alex had never seen the ruler in such a mood. He didn't trust the woman he was talking to and expected something similar. Already at the hotel, something happened that threw the former mentor of the King of Hell off balance. The unfazed Durg announced that he plans to trade in weapons and wants to make it his main source of income. Another scandal broke out. Alex believed that the boy was neglecting his primary duties to his people. During the argument, the demons didn't pay attention to the fact that it was happening right in front of the human boy. The Durg tried to explain to his henchmen that thanks to the dragon scales, he would be able to reach the top quickly. It was worth a lot before the war, so their race may have a more advantageous position. Since these words did not have enough argumentation, I had to open up my vision of the future a little. The demiurge said that he was not going to assimilate among humans, but was only disguising himself to rule them. This information radically changed the mood of his interlocutor. He again believed in his master. And he happily ran to carry out the order to find a building in which they could do their business. When both of his so-called comrades disappeared from the horizon, the boy was finally able to breathe freely. He could already clearly see his insidious plan coming to fruition, but the waiting process was tiring. The Durg was in high spirits. He dreamed of his beautiful and bright future, free from other people's desires and expectations. Having appeared on Earth not so long ago, the young man has already managed to do many things. Good at calculating the situation a few steps ahead. But sometimes I just wanted to relax and observe the beautiful world I found myself in. Periodically, Durg caught himself thinking that in moments of calm, something inside was still stirring him up. Voices, somewhere in the middle, sought bloodshed, not cooperation with the people. It was as if all his predecessors had unanimously demanded the destruction of the world in the same way in which they themselves had lost. These past incarnations craved revenge for their suffering, unable to endure a peaceful existence. The former kings of hell believed that only open war with humanity could end the cycle of rebirth. But Durg himself thought otherwise, and therefore preferred to ignore the demands of the incompetents who failed to achieve their plans. In the evening, Alex returned, having completed his master's task. Half an hour later, the demon led his master to an abandoned armory, a building that now belonged to them. Surveying the new possessions, albeit in a somewhat neglected state, the boy expressed his satisfaction to his subordinates. The conspirators only had to entrust Aiden with the renovation of the new acquisition and do a few more things. This shouldn't have been a problem for the young man, because he had previously worked as a construction foreman. Hearing yet another piece of information about his new charge, Durg raised his eyebrows again. He couldn't understand how someone with an F rank could be born to parents who were once pure-blooded. The wonders of human selection of heroes seemed endless, everything was calculated simply by chance. So, one could expect significant achievements from Aiden, which one could not ignore. After all, the young man could be promoted in the human world and earn a name backed by money. Currently, the receptionist was only perceived as the descendant of an F-rank man, not understanding that he could have power. This whole situation was incredibly annoying to Durg, and with his characteristic explosiveness, he lashed out at Alex over it. The king had the impression that he was in a trap that incompetent idiots had built for him. So, to somehow console himself, the guy and his subordinate went out to get something to eat. To their surprise, the demons saw Aiden in person behind the dining room counter. It turned out that in his free time, the young man also helps out in the kitchen, selling noodles. Durg became so interested in this dish that he decided to order it. The portions for Alex and the mentor were prepared quite quickly and professionally. And soon Aiden brought something incredibly beautiful to the table. Inhaling the delicious aroma of hot food, the king of hell could not hold back the saliva that had accumulated in his mouth. The first sip finally cemented in his mind that he was in front of the food of the gods. The Deorg was not used to holding back his feelings, so he immediately praised his protege. Alex, who trusted the owner's recommendations, also decided to try the food offered. And a moment later, he followed the example of the king of hell, noting that Aiden was a master cook. The boy blushed at what he heard addressed to him. He had not been praised so many times in his life. He decided to tell how meeting Durg had already changed his life and the lives of his loved ones. He managed to send his younger brothers to a private warrior school because he wanted a better life for them. The complimentary conversation was interrupted by shouts in the dining room. One of the visitors shouted that he found a fly in his portion and began to indignantly insult the establishment. Aiden perceived the claims about the sanitation bill at the facility as lies and outright disrespect, after which he got a plate of noodles in the face from a rich troublemaker. The scoundrel started shouting in response, something about family ties and the possibility of closing the dining room. But halfway through the sentence, he suddenly stopped. A thought flashed brightly in his eyes. The aristocrat recognized the dirty figure before him as an F-rank descendant of the Muden family. And from that moment on, the conversation turned to personalities, contempt oozing from every word the rich bastard said. Aiden tried to answer calmly, defending the honor of his family. But it was all in vain. The scandal gained more and more viewers who enjoyed mocking the weak. What happened was that the guy had to experience several times almost every day. The insults were so terrible that even Durg could not stand it. Putting his chopsticks on the table, he looked back at the impudent man. At that moment, Aiden was no longer afraid for his honor. He knew what audacity could lead to for an aristocrat. The king of hell pointed his hand at the man and woman in complete silence. Slowly clenching his fingers into a fist, the demon remarked that he would destroy them like insects. In a second, there was almost nothing left of the brazen upstart. The terrified woman, who was probably his partner, began to scream frantically. Grabbing the hem of her dress with her hands, she rushed to run away. But she didn't have time because Durga's anger affected her too. The remains of both representatives, unworthy of being called elite, began to slowly perish before our eyes. And soon only the ashes were scattered by the hand of the king of hell. No one was allowed to disrespect the hero. Alex watched the Lord all this time, not saying a word. The entire invisibility plan that the Durg was supposed to follow had just failed. The awkward silence was broken by the appearance of postcards on almost every plate in the establishment. It told of the appearance of dragons in the palace and invited heroes to solve this problem. Aiden answered his mentor's call without hesitation and began closing the establishment. Less than an hour passed before the entire company was racing towards the palace. At first glance, they were all determined, but there was one caveat. The young hero could not free himself from anxiety about the upcoming battle. He felt insecure because before meeting the Dorg, he could not even think about confronting a dragon. And now, for some reason, even just looking at his new mentor cheered Aiden up. The king of hell could even say nothing and just go about his business. His very presence nearby was perceived by the boy as support. Alex, having learned about such nuances, noticed that it would help Aiden at a crucial moment. because in all the battles that await the hero, extraordinary courage is required of him. Realizing the high expectations placed on him by his fellow travelers, the former receptionist took matters into his own hands. Another half-hour passed, and a striking picture appeared before the company's eyes. A giant dragon enveloped the palace with its body, turning it and everything around it into blocks of ice. He was also possessed by an unknown substance that increased his rage and hatred of humanity. Seeing the state of the building, Aiden assumed that there were no survivors left there, but Durg insisted that the victims were still alive and inside. The presence of other heroes on the other side of the mountain slopes relieved the boy of some responsibility, at the same time creating an arena of observers for their show. The townspeople who managed to get outside the palace walls tried to figure out what to do. They begged for the salvation of at least someone who cared, which was a good basis for a feat. They had no hope in their ruler, believing that he had abandoned them to their fate. Therefore, he really didn't care about mere mortals. He was only trying to protect his own skin, and all the shouting he threw everywhere was only about protecting his fat persona. This subhuman tried to survive by any means, even at the expense of other deaths. Suddenly, a cart flew right over his head with its passengers, each stranger than the other. At first, everyone thought it was an attack. But later, the victims began to think that a hero had finally arrived to help them. Aiden wasn't going to defend the wealthy, so they quickly dubbed him a pervert in underwear. The local ruler had no choice but to rely on his own strength. The priority of the newcomers was to save ordinary townspeople. The dragon, meanwhile, became increasingly furious, holding back nothing. Everyone on the mountainside watched intently as the strange hero raced toward danger. At this point, they weren't concerned about his strange appearance. The boy himself was shivering from the cold, but he was not going to back down. And while the snot was flying in all directions, he tried to find support from those around him. For the landscape they passed through was filled with the despair and defeat of many heroes before him. The enemy was getting closer, and it seemed more ferocious with every second. It was necessary to prepare for active action. Alex was to do the main part and hand over the almost finished dragon to Aiden. The Durg calmly gave the final instructions before the operation began, and his henchman promised that this time he would do better than last time. Now he knew how to act so as not to fall into the trap himself, especially since according to the Golden Dragon's plan, they had to deliver this individual alive. Therefore, Alex planned to simply stun his victim, leaving room for maneuver. The young man was ordered to carefully monitor his opponent and be ready to act at the decisive moment. When the demon disappeared, the cart stopped. The King of Hell ordered Aiden to solve any problems on his own and not to disturb his sleep. But the former receptionist lost self-control due to the gigantic size of his opponent and begged for help. Meanwhile, Alex had already reached his opponent and attracted his attention. He swiftly flew at the dragon from above. It was impossible to avoid such an attack. The creature controlling the monster seemed to recognize the demon and immediately rushed towards it. But it was all in vain. The cunning opponent avoided any direct confrontation with her. Aiden watched in amazement at his partner's skill, unable to believe his eyes. The guy's vantage point allowed him to see the situation better, while others didn't have such an advantage. Therefore, taking advantage of the opportunity, the newly minted hero wanted to find a more convenient place for the final moment. The young man's thoughts were interrupted by Durge's voice. He simply demanded active action, and while helping with the defense, he used his strength. The King of Hell activated a protective barrier on Aiden's shield. But he assured me that from now on the boy would be safe, even if his breath smelled of ice. Touched by such concern, the hero was now ready for anything. But Durgus was not in the mood to listen to praises. He had already seen his first dream. Aiden ran headlong forward. He didn't want to miss Alex's delivery of the loot. And to do this, it was necessary to find the highest point on this plateau. Seeing a place that suited his request, the young man quickly ran in that direction. But the road was so slippery that he rode 2/3 of the way to his destination on his back. The sounds of the fight were getting closer and closer. The monster growled in response to each of Alex's blows. And he, in turn, was not going to stop there and attacked even more powerfully. Realizing that this could get the dragon carrier into trouble, the parasite that controlled it ordered it to attack the enemy with ice breath. To do this, it was necessary to take a more advantageous position, so the monster tried to increase the distance. He took to the sky hoping that his opponent wouldn't chase him, but it turned out the other way around. The demon had a goal, which he adhered to unswervingly. Strong, short attacks were a method of wearing down the dragon so that it would fall helpless into Aiden's hands. Alex jumped on his opponent's face, immediately activating 100 hands that turned into giant claws. When the demon began to tear at the monster's flesh, the creature lost coordination from the pain. After destroying part of the palace, the monster fell to the ground, groaning in pain. Due to its size, the dragon could not have suffered fatal damage from such an attack. Therefore, Alex needed to complete what he had planned. To do this, it was necessary to press the monster against the wall again. The roar of the final act of the battle echoed through the valley, along with rocks flying in all directions. Aiden, who couldn't recover from his previous outbursts, began to admire Alex even more. Since the boy still didn't understand who he was dealing with, he thought he was looking at an outstanding hero. But that wasn't the most important thing right now, because the affected residents of the city were watching them. Some of them, meanwhile, had already begun to side with the half-naked stranger. With no other choice, they had no choice but to root for this weirdo. Seeing the crowd's reaction behind him, Aiden couldn't believe his eyes at first. He had never received so much approval before. But because of the real situation, the young man felt like an even bigger loser compared to the hero Alex. Only now did the young man realize that he wanted true fame for his real deeds. And, as if by God's providence, he had such a chance. Behind Aiden, someone began to plead for help. After peering into the ice drifts, the former receptionist saw a frozen family with a baby in their arms. He hesitated because the fight seemed to be entering its final stages, and there was little time left for rescue. But despite the criticality of the moment, Aiden did not want to miss his chance. While the boy was dealing with his conscience, Alex made his opponent extremely angry. The dragon flew furiously over the ruins of the palace, but he growled something in an ancient language. Fortunately, the demon understood her well, so it became obvious that a parasite was sitting inside the monster. This creature fed on its host and was indestructible as long as it remained intact. Therefore, the dragon could be considered simply a flying zombie. The strategy needed to be changed radically. Only by losing its limbs could the monster become relatively safe. Meanwhile, the flying monster decided to counterattack. Alex responded by activating his 100 hands and preparing to meet the attacker. But this time he decided that the blows should not be separated. Therefore, he combined the limbs into a single giant palm. A giant fist, fingers clenched in the air. It landed directly on the ice dragon's head, because of which the latter interrupted the flight, simply crashing into the ground. Immediately regrouping, the demon attacked again, not allowing his opponent to recover. To prevent it from escaping the trap, Alex grabbed the dragon by the throat. He growled loudly in pain, causing the rocks around him to shake. With the last of its strength, sensing a threat to its life, the flying lizard opened its cloak. She released her icy breath towards her opponent. The wave was so powerful that it knocked everyone in its path, including Aiden. Horror gripped every muscle in the boy's body. He could only scream in fear. Thanks to all the saints, which is located at a great distance from the inhabitants of the city. Only Alex didn't care about this pathetic attempt to seize the initiative. The dragon's actions only aroused greater rage in him. In a second, the demon divided the giant fist into several limbs. He grabbed the wings and paws of his opponent with them and squeezed tightly. After which he ruthlessly tore them from the body. The painful loss made the creature forget about self-control. Even the parasite seemed to be in a state of disarray. When only the main skeleton of the dragon remained in one of his hands, Alex used a technique. He threw the creature to the ground with such force that it caused a large explosion and finished it off with several blows. The amazed residents of the city did not stop their prayers all this time. They begged God to have mercy on the fate of the hero and save their city from disaster. But the young man himself could only think about those who needed salvation next to him. He rushed with all possible speed to the frozen family. The woman held the child in her arms with all her strength, still begging for help. But after looking more closely, I realized that there was nothing the adults could do. Only a child could actually survive such an adventure. Aiden quickly began chipping away at the chunks of ice that had frozen around the victims. While doing his job, he kept in mind the completion of the duel for which he was here. But he didn't notice the light that had flared up again in the dragon's mouth. Local residents tried to warn their favorite and protect him from danger, but it was already too late. A bright, icy glow began to spread around the giant lizard. Aiden had no time to escape, so he decided to take advantage of the protection that the Durg had provided him. Unfortunately, the shield turned out to be insufficiently powerful to contain such a wave. It shattered into pieces, and the receptionist flew back several dozen meters. This attack illuminated the entire valley, blowing a freezing cold over those present. Even the palace ruler was dissatisfied. If the dragon was trying to impress, his plan failed because Alex didn't even flinch. The only thing that was annoying was that the human shell, which the demon had been guarding for 20 years, had suffered significant damage. Aiden, on the other hand, seemed to be able to open his eyes with the last of his strength. He couldn't understand why he felt such a sudden weakness. Raising his head among the piles of rubble around him, the young man saw the snow-covered bodies of the victims. All that was left of the child's mother hugged the baby, who was crying loudly from fear and cold. It was urgent to rush to help, but for some reason, Aiden's body did not obey. Looking back, the hero realized with horror that he had lost his legs and arm during the last attack. Meanwhile, the dragon decided to consolidate its result and entered the second round. The spectators began to beg their savior to flee immediately. Overcoming the incredible pain, Aiden began to crawl towards the child. He wanted to protect at least one person. It no longer mattered to him how Alex's fight with the mighty ice-flying giant would end. The F-rank warrior only wanted to warm the baby in his arms before the next wave of ice. And when that happened, I was focused only on holding the baby tighter. The blast wave threw the boy back a few dozen meters. By some miracle, Aiden remained conscious until the moment when Durg appeared nearby. The King of Hell watched in amazement as his ward writhed. Looking at the sprawling remains of the hero's body, he doubted that victory in the war would be for humanity. The former receptionist, in turn, had been trying to justify his failure all this time. Even as he sank into oblivion, the boy still muttered pleas and promises under his breath. Aiden only woke up the next morning. His first thought was to find out information about the battle with the dragon. But when he saw himself lying in his mentor's bed in the hotel penthouse, the young man was confused. He understood that it was urgent to comprehend the latest events, especially considering the restored limbs he was looking at right now. Even his legs, of which only the thighs remained, were now intact, apart from the enormous scars. It was an incomprehensible sight that Aiden might have considered magic. The voice of Durg on the street brought the young man out of his comatose thoughts, and he immediately rushed to what remained of the outer wall of the building. There, indeed, stood the King of Hell in the company of Alex, next to a pile of beautiful weapons. They were immediately bombarded with questions about the events that had happened to the dragon and the child. The Doerg reported that all matters with the dragon had been successfully resolved and the child was safe. Today, the young man's help was needed in the armory, so he shouldn't delay any longer if he had recovered. A wave of gratitude and peace spread through Aiden's body, as if by magic. He entered the routine of subsequent battles and tasks with unprecedented determination. Gradually, the boy began to rely more and more on his, as he believed, comrades. By obeying the Durg's orders unconditionally, he managed to get the desired result. This satisfied both his mentor and himself. The young man considered it a development of his warrior's career. Alex had to fight possessed creatures every time, and although the scale of the infestation by the strange parasite turned out to be large, the struggle always had a successful outcome. Each time returning from a mission, Durg had the opportunity to increase his existing collection of weapons. The opening day of the armory was approaching at the speed of light. The King of Hell approved of this course of events. It seemed that there were no obstacles in the way. But that was only his reality. Because Aiden, under Alex's wing, fought with all sorts of monsters in this world. Again and again they wrote on challenges and requests, freeing humanity from yet another possessed dragon. It seemed like this had been repeated hundreds of times. During short breaks, the company always spent their time in the dining room over a portion of noodles. For the demons, this food became an integral part of the beautiful life on Earth, to which they aspired. And Aiden was pleased that his capricious mentor liked his culinary skills. The Daor could say nothing, as evidenced by his constant appetite, which only a dragon could interrupt. Almost instantly, the trio broke away from their usual places and set off on another journey. To save humanity, which in just 20 years would be destroyed by a great, holy war. The young hero looked more and more like the truth. He rushed into the mouth of danger without even blinking an eye. In this way, Aiden gained experience in combat, although he never showed that he had any outstanding abilities. Operating only with small techniques that had an effect only with the help of Alex's warm-up. Only the three of them knew about it. Because for all the other rescued people, the unknown weirdo in his underwear became an undisputed hero. This was a cause for pride, as the fame of the Dragon Slayer spread throughout the kingdoms. Finally, thanks to fruitful work on the armory was completed. The building looked completely different than when they first saw it. Everything inside looked even cooler than outside. While Aiden circled between the rows with various artifacts and supplies, Alex rejoiced. But this was until the Dorg put the management of the armory on him. In his imagination, the master was not supposed to deal with such small matters. There were partners for that. Therefore, from today on, Aiden and Alex were to become the managers of this shop and promote the business. The additional responsibilities, of course, did not please the already tired demon and the young man. Since there was nowhere to go, the hero begged only for the opportunity to remain a cafeteria worker. The King of Hell, of course, was not against this, but he had to do something extra at the end. Alex brought out a shield of incredible beauty for the boy to examine. This thing radiated strength and power. The Dorg explained that it was a doomsday shield, crafted from dragon scales by the best blacksmith in the underworld. The rare artifact could even withstand several blows from the Demon King himself. And now this thing was going to go to Aiden. After the young man's hands and the object merged, he found himself in some other dimension. There was nothing there but the giant eye of the shield. Judgment Day announced that from now on, he would serve the boy until his last breath. The former receptionist did not expect such devotion from an extraordinary artifact. And when, unexpectedly, he found himself back in the armory hall, he could not calm his frantic heartbeat. Durg decided to put all the tricks into practice immediately, so he attacked Aiden at half strength. The shield worked flawlessly, absorbing the enemy's attack, but the wall of the building was destroyed again. Alex began to argue fiercely with his master about this, because he had put a lot of effort into the repair. The demon calmed down only when he heard the joyful cries of the receptionist outside. The artifact really worked perfectly. This meant that they were one step closer to a great war, preparing the hero for confrontation. All that remained was to find armor similar to the shield, which could enhance the protective effect. Such generosity from his mentor touched Aiden to the core. He could not hold back his delight and tears, considering himself the happiest person in the universe. Even the King of Hell felt uneasy about such sincere and kind emotions on his side. Meanwhile, a vile act involving first-class scum was taking place in the kingdom of Verdi. A band of robbers came here to take what the hand of the demons had not touched. The eye of the leader of the villains did not escape Princess April, who, out of despair, could not utter a word in response to the bullying. This shameful act was interrupted by the appearance of a stranger. In the complete silence that had settled in the throne room, he followed a trajectory known only to him. These were strange movements that even covered the balconies. The robbers watched the cloaked figure carefully, taking no time to stop him. Finally, having examined what seemed to be everything that interested him, the stranger found himself again at the entrance. He broke the silence first, announcing that he had found no traces of the battle. This prompted the leader to open his mouth and demand to be named. But the young man did not want to enter into dialogue with unworthy individuals. He considered a more effective strategy to quickly clarify relations. A moment later, he was at the throne, and he gave the robber a great fright. But it was here that the warrior found what he was looking for, one powerful explosion that decided the fate of the kingdom. The power was so great, which affected not only the city's buildings, but also everything that fell into its trajectory for many kilometers. Evaluating the results, it was difficult to imagine that this was the work of any one person. The analysis was interrupted by the screams of the enraged robbers. The guy tried to stop them by warning them of the danger in case the conflict escalated. But it was all in vain. The scum were blinded by the impunity of their actions. That's why they suffered a crushing defeat in just a few seconds. The entire pack that had rushed at the stranger lost their limbs. The rest of the gang stood still, as if glued to the floor, no one daring to take a step forward. Now, the young man in the cloak decided to announce that he had arrived as a scout because of what had happened. It was necessary to find out and report to the top about a person endowed with extraordinary strength. God's representatives on earth, the Holy of Holies, awaited the results of this mission. The gang leader, upon hearing the mention of the saints, indignantly began shouting obscenities. The stranger leaned towards him in response with a smile that held a threat. He wanted to know exactly what had happened in this palace, in every detail. The extent of the destruction that the kingdom of Verde had suffered piqued his curiosity. But the scoundrel, in fact, knew nothing himself, because he had already arrived at the ruins. All that could be operated on this issue were rumors about a single blonde. Eyewitnesses, including local residents, said that he was all alone. But he resisted the guards and in the end blew up the throne room. Those who were here did not survive, so no one knows more details, not even the princess. Having learned everything he was interested in, the stranger turned towards the exit. The interlocutor, feeling support under his feet, began to prove to him that the unknown person had done the right thing. All the robbers considered the ruler of Verde a tyrant, whose power was built on the bones of the fortress's inhabitants. And what happened was for them the providence of God, who sent his Messiah here. The young man in the raincoat emphasized that it was too early to draw such conclusions. And finally, he decided to carry out a sacred judgment on those who had defiled the faith. The bandit leader's head separated from his body with a single snap of his fingers. A few days passed, and the company led by the King of Hell again stood over another defeated dragon. This individual was also infected with a parasite, so it was decided to summon the goddess of the flying people. The large number of monsters they killed indicated serious problems in the population of this nation. And Durga was struck by the golden dragon's inaction. Alex believed it was related to the dimensional library, which caused the goddess to be stuck in a human body. Everything is based on secrets that could not be revealed because it would be a violation of the rules. One could only guess about the true reasons for certain actions. While waiting for his companions to return to the wagon, Aiden had time to take a nap. And he was extremely tired during the last fight and had to recover. The last winged giant would be difficult to neutralize even for true Dragon Slayer heroes. Before falling asleep, the boy took care of his new shield, wrapping it with a cloth. Aiden wanted to preserve the extraordinary artifact for the younger generation of his family, without knowing the details. The shield was capable of absorbing anyone with any abilities, so relatives as well as enemies were in danger. After loading the boy into the cart, the company set off back to the village. The naive young man did not even suspect that masters from the demon kingdom were involved in his healing. And they tried their best to impress even their king. The only problem was that canonically, he wasn't the same hero. But this also saved Durg the need to destroy Aiden 20 years later. Why, deep down, the King of Hell was incredibly happy. He had already gotten used to the eccentric, who captivated with his sincerity. Generation Zero, from which the countdown of heroes always began, has not yet been born. According to the rules, which were strictly followed by all parties, Aiden was a representative of the fourth generation. Therefore, even his descendant could become the chosen one. Flirting with the results of a great war now looked like plans with a long-term perspective. Therefore, Alex did not fully understand his master's logic. To Durg, it all looked like a game with idiotic rules that were forbidden to be broken, and he didn't want to play by anyone's instructions or become a puppet. Realizing that now is the right moment to find out the truth, Alex decided to ask the young man the reasons for his escape from hell. But he never heard a response, because they were interrupted again by unforeseen circumstances. A giant boat engulfed in flames flew over the heads of the travelers in the sky. The flying ship, not far behind, attacked the dragon. It was an impressive sight, especially considering the symbols seen on the sails. The spirit of the sacred tree is a symbol of the purebloods. Although for the guy, everything he saw was important only from the point of view of curiosity, Alex found such events even stranger than anything he had seen before. The world was rapidly changing its course. He and his boss agreed that they needed to take a closer look at the suspicious events. It was necessary to teleport to the hills behind which the falling ship was hidden. Once there, the demons saw that the ship had crashed and people were trying to move their cargo. The soldiers dragged the giant bundles with all their might, but progress was still too slow. The wheels of the carts on which the luggage rested broke when they hit stone ledges. The manager was terribly dissatisfied with the work of his subordinates, but circumstances were beyond his control. So he just kept shouting and ordering them to handle the precious cargo with care. The greatest terror of those present was still caused by the dragon, which relentlessly pursued them. And now the winged giant was entering a new circle. The beast aimed to completely destroy the human race and was preparing to accumulate flames. And no matter how hard they tried to resist and confront this invasion, it was all in vain. This time it seemed the monster decided to go all in. The pillar of fire was so powerful that it scattered the burning bodies of the soldiers in different directions. The terrified manager barely managed to save his ass from death. Watching the monster enter another circle, the man realized that his affairs were in bad shape. But the duty to the elders to preserve the integrity of the cargo was more important than one's own life. Because even if he emerged from the battle with the dragon unscathed, he would be eliminated for losing a large bundle. Durg and Alex didn't understand the flying lizard's fixated behavior on these people. So the manager's shout that it was a cub put everything in its place. Once again, the mages and archers prepared to repel the enemy's attack. The attacker flew in their direction, not slowing down. And this would have been the last attack if not for the appearance of the purebred to protect human interests. He jumped over the manager like a grasshopper. With one powerful blow of his sword, the young man cut the dragon in half from head to tail. The dead carcass fell to the ground. It no longer posed a danger. The warrior, judging by the exclamations around him, was named Julian. Despite the flattering words in his direction, he didn't even blink an eye. The Lord's condescending attitude towards his subordinates and everything around him completely characterized him. The main thing for Julian was to keep the mission secret, because the family's honor was at stake. While this conversation was taking place, no one noticed the observers standing nearby. This continued until the demons teleported onto the cargo. The Durg kicked away a piece of torn cloth and saw the eye of the dragon that had been captured in violation of the agreement. The creature was still alive and showed no signs of infection with the parasite they had seen in other specimens. The cub, which was mercilessly killed, was simply protecting its mother, trying to free her. The King of Hell realized that until now, he had considered pureblood families to be better than they actually were. Uninvited guests made significant adjustments to the plans of a respectable family. They witnessed a crime. Alex, realizing that the situation was ripe for a fight, tried to dissuade his master from provocations. But it was already too late, for Julian had ordered his men to take care of the disturbers of his peace. The manager immediately rushed to carry out the order. The warriors ran towards the two strangers, who were in no hurry to take any active action. In the end, Durg became completely bored. He truly expected more from a G-class warrior. Therefore, the young man ordered Alex to deal with the attackers as quickly as possible, although the latter was against it. Because such actions could make the presence of the King of Hell on Earth too obvious. Destroying the reputation of a representative of a purebred family of the highest class will raise many questions. With the first arrows fired at the demons, there was no turning back. To avoid the attack, they moved to another location, what caused a state of shock in everyone present. It was difficult to persuade Alex to take active action. He was used to weighing everything. To avoid unnecessary problems for as long as possible, the demon suggested simply running away and not engaging in confrontation. But the attack of people from all sides forced him to bow his head to the orders of the Durg. A pillar of flame erupted from his mouth as if he were a relative of dragons. Light shone on the horizon, but Aiden didn't see it because he was still sleeping soundly. One by one, the soldiers died without ever reaching their enemy. Those who were not caught in the flames were beheaded by more traditional methods. Despite the deadly threat, the military still continued to attack, following orders. And very soon, blood flowed in rivers on the rocky ledges. Even the archers who tried to help the infantry were powerless. Alex dealt with all aerial threats quickly and ruthlessly. The magicians who used their powers against him under cover were struck by their own weapons. With the help of open portals, lightning bolts struck directly into the bodies of their creators. As silence fell over the battlefield, Alex felt an indescribable longing for the bloodshed. He hadn't killed people in a long time, so it was so hard to stop in time. The manager no longer has the resources left to attack, so it was fitting that Julian came to his people's aid. He attacked his opponents from the air, using the same technique as against the dragons. A powerful explosion rang out in the place where the strangers had been standing a second ago. The smoke gradually cleared, and the hero patiently awaited the results of his attack. He never expected his opponents to remain alive. Julian realized that he was dealing with unusual people and suggested the intervention of other pure-blood families. After several minutes spent trying to solve this riddle, he became completely angry. In the end, the personalities of the opponents were completely unimportant. The main thing was their elimination. The Durg only smiled in response. He understood perfectly well that he was no match for the warrior. Approaching the opponent caused changes within the purebred representative. Inside, the call of blood was awakened, and this was visible to the naked eye to everyone who was nearby. Inside Julian, there was a truly powerful force that he probably didn't even realize he had. The manager covered his face with his hand in fear, thinking that the owner was going to explode. But everything was completely different. Now the thoroughbred was ready for maximum confrontation. Durg's eyes shone with a happy gleam. He wanted to see a worthy opponent in action. In a moment, Julian was at his face. The series of blows the young man used threw Alex back several meters. But the desired result was not achieved. The King of Hell remained unharmed. The former mentor began to persuade the ruler to leave his opponent alone. He was truly afraid of what might happen during this fight, unlike the cranky maximalist. Especially since he was already able to deprive him of part of his limb. But Durg did not want to leave the arrogant young man in the position of the winner. Julian rushed into the attack again. All this time, the King of Hell watched the pureblood's actions. No matter how hard he tried to destroy the enemy, he was too slow and weak. Demiurge is enjoying this moment. He finally realized that the fourth generation is no match for him. But the caustic remarks directed at Julian provoked him to more decisive action. Purebred believed that only representatives of the privileged classes were capable of such audacity. But the King of Hell vaguely hinted that he was not human at all. None of the attacks that lit up the sky ever reached their target. Finally, from the boredom that had once again swept over Durg, the latter began to yawn. He decided not to waste any more time on pointless maneuvers, but simply to destroy the scoundrel. The King of Hell activated one of his main techniques, the hellish guillotine. Realizing that it smelled of something fried, Alex managed to cover the person with himself. Julian's counterattack hit the demon in the back, but fortunately it was not fatal to him. Turning to the purebred, he attacked him in the head. Because of which, the representative of the noble human race lost consciousness, falling to the ground. The Durg did not expect such an act from this former mentor. It seemed illogical. In general, most of his companions' actions seemed contradictory to the guy. The King of Hell demanded urgent explanations. Alex replied that he could not break the laws of this world, regardless of the ruler's wishes. All the actions of every representative of every race were combined into the canvas of creation. It was impossible to announce to everyone the coming of the demiurge before the appointed time, because then the not fully perfected shell of the ruler could suffer irreparable damage before the war. The Dorg had a different opinion. He couldn't understand where people could get such power from, if the strongest weren't even worth his little finger. Suddenly, the young man was struck by the thought that he was not informed about all the nuances at all. Who can accompany him on his journey? And this was confirmed by the expression on the interlocutor's face. 20 years of life stood between the complete picture and the boy. Alex wasn't going to say anything that could change the course of fate. He couldn't be talked into it in any way, even threats of execution. The only thing that was obvious was that it was necessary to preserve the heroes until the Great War. Therefore, the fourth generation had to survive to make Durg the greatest king of hell. But on the other hand, it dawned on Alex that he could completely break the thread of purebreds right now, thus avoiding unnecessary problems, and immediately moved from words to deeds. The Deurg barely managed to stop his partner, who could have destroyed his plans to take root in the human world. They agreed that they would not touch Julian, they just had to cover their tracks. As the Lord disappeared into the portal that led to Aiden, Alex exhaled. Now he could promise the pureblood a hellish future on Earth. The Duke of the Underworld could not leave a severed limb as a gift for the ego of a daring warrior. He promised to take revenge on the entire family in 20 years so that the boy's descendants would disappear forever. Aiden slept with the shield on his chest the whole time, drooling. The Dorg quietly approached the cart, watching his charge. He wondered what this boy's future would be like in 20 years, and the problems with the dragon race hung over them like a storm cloud. It was necessary to contact the cunning goddess, who seemed not to be at all worried about her children. As if by magic, a golden dragon materialized in front of the Durg in midair. It was as if the woman was watching the young man's every step. She didn't even hide it. A conversation ensued, the essence of which was not entirely clear. Even now, the golden dragon was more interested in why the Durg had descended to the surface of the earth than the problems of his people. Of course, the King of Hell wasn't going to answer provocative questions. He presented a nearby boy in front of the goddess and aimed arrows at her. The Dorg spoke of the pureblood family's plans to dismember dragons for sale. He gave specific examples, including the latest, and asked about the reason for the girl's inaction. It turned out that Alex was right. The golden dragon was unable to act alone in this world. She needed the help of someone strong, like Dorg. And now the woman was trying to win the young man over to her side, citing a common enemy. But the guy wasn't even going to lift a finger for a simple thank you. Even the story about the laws of a world where dragons could be killed with impunity among humans didn't work. The mere mention of these idiotic rules made the King of Hell's eye twitch. He hated everything about it. The goddess's sudden attack to awaken her power pushed the young man to the ground. For the first time in all his time among people, Durg bled. It was a showy performance with proof that the laws of the universe exist for a reason. The angry King of Hell jumped to his feet. He did not like the pressure on himself. Realizing that she had touched the boy's soul, the golden dragon finally smiled. She wondered why Deorg had decided to abandon his calling, and now was the right time to do so. For 666 years, none of his predecessors had even thought of doing anything like that. It was also surprising that the boy was not punished for violating the law. Of course, the King of Hell understood that such curiosity was based on a strong desire to do the same. Although the goddess denied this assumption, now the woman had the perfect opportunity to observe a representative of another race like her, and the consequences that await him. She so powdered his brains with her cunning interrogations that the young man lost his vigilance for a moment. Suddenly, he decided to be honest and, after carefully considering what he was going to say, opened his mouth. The story about the reasons for abdicating the throne was interrupted by the appearance of Alex, who immediately called his master on his way. The goddess was angered by the unexpected intervention because it violated her interests, but the moment was lost. Durg had already turned away, not wanting to continue the dialogue. Lying down next to Aiden, he promised to tell him everything that was on his mind next time. In farewell, the Golden Dragon asked to reveal the identities of the heroes who commit the crime. None of the villains should have remained incognito while her children were dying. For this deed, the King of Hell wanted a reward 3 times greater than previously agreed upon. He wasn't worried about the other person's reaction. She simply had no choice but to agree to the demands. Demons never worked for free, or at a loss to themselves. Finally, the goddess concealed an aura of evil that could provoke the purebloods during the encounter. From now on, Durg could feel more incognito in this world and take time to develop. The Golden Dragon didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but difficult times required decisive action. The trio teleported from the clearing right under the gate of the famous family of the hero Julian. A striking picture opened before them. These purebreds were living their best lives in every sense. The Holistura family was considered one of the most respected heroes of the highest class. Over 60,000 years, they found many sponsors who invested money in them. And dragon hunting brought in large amounts of additional income. The Holisturation were in effect dragon poachers and got away with it for many years. Compared to these predators, Aiden's family looked completely innocent. And now, standing at the palace gates, the young man was in a semi-conscious state of delight. The demons began to bring the boy to consciousness because a secret operation awaited them. The Dorg was eager to unravel the great mystery of the pureblood lineage. Alex managed to stop him halfway, noting that disguise was needed. A few minutes later, the demons appeared before the guards in new guises, having changed their clothes. They sincerely believed that in this way, they would avoid being recognized after recent events. Now there was no reason to postpone a visit to the Holisturatsia estate. The only condition that suddenly appeared in Aiden's mind was an official announcement of his status. In principle, Durg was not against it. Therefore, he announced to the guards at the top of his voice that the candidate for the role of the last hero requested an audience. This behavior actually saved them time, eliminating the need to force their way through. The inside of the estate of a respectable family was as exquisite as the outside. Visitors looked around in amazement. Even demons appreciated the status of the life of the pureblood elite. Aiden noticed on one of the walls a portrait of a hero who had fought against the King of Hell for 13 days. It was Julian's ancestor, the winner, Kevin Pan Holisturatsia VII. Of course, the receptionist had great respect for this man, as the savior of the world. The young man began to get even more nervous, believing that he was not worth even the little finger of such a famous family. The Dorg did not understand such enthusiasm. He did not believe that his ward was worse than Julian in blood. A man entered the hall and immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. He was dressed like a noble lord, and judging by his speech, he carried a pure gene. The newcomer introduced himself as Sam Pan Holisturatsia, a retired third-generation hero. Aiden, in response, immediately jumped up and bowed respectfully. As it turned out, the owner of the estate understood perfectly well who was in front of him. He prepared well, studying all the available information before coming here. And to be honest, I was surprised that Aiden didn't give up trying to become a hero and found helpers. The young man was very flattered that the undisputed stars of the heroic world were interested in him. While the boy maintained polite conversation, Sam studied his companions, considering them to be wealthy sponsors. The first impression changed when Durg opened his mouth. The King of Hell wasn't going to stand on ceremony. He started the conversation on a suspicious note. Under the pretense that they were both representatives of heroes, the demon wanted to test the ground of honesty. Sam tried to put his interlocutor in his place, referring to his young age. But Durg, despite Aiden's attempts to smooth out the sharp corners, kept pressing. He was interested in rumors that the Holisturats were trading in high-quality materials useful to heroes. The interlocutor's first question in response was an interest in the solvency of visitors. He listed the goods he could sell, omitting anything related to dragons from the list. Therefore, Durg interrupted the speech, directly answering that he was interested in specific things. Throwing the bag on the table, the demon noted that Aiden needed things to strengthen his hero status. As currency, the King of Hell offered bloody volcanic stone from the underworld, a rare thing. But despite the good fortune, Sam still towed the line about a truce between the two races and the law. Realizing that this would not yield true information, Durg announced that they were leaving the estate. But finally, he hinted that he had recently seen the symbols of the master's family on a ship carrying a dragon. At first, there was silence in the room. Sam began to suspect that he was talking to the same stranger who had thwarted the plan. The Dorg did not want to engage in open confrontation now, so he insisted that he had simply heard rumors. But he hinted that the cream of the heroic clans were engaged in creating monopolies on quality goods. And this prevented newcomers from building a career and achieving significant progress. Silence reigned again between the interlocutors, which was broken first by Sam. He remembered an unknown hero in a mask who destroyed many dragons. Aiden always carried a shield with him after his mentor gave it to him. And now this incredible thing was noticed by the hero of the third generation of the Holisturatia family. He called the shield by its true name, Doomsday, impressing the Deorg with his knowledge. It was also obvious to the man that it had been made recently from the scales of those dragons that had been destroyed. And this led to the idea that an unknown champion of winged monsters was sitting here. It was also obvious to Sam that the Brat in the Hat was the main one in this trio. So, threats from a coalition of influential families were addressed exclusively to the King of Hell. They lost a lot of money due to the actions of an unknown hero and were looking for satisfaction. After the general meeting, the further fate of the unknown and everyone involved will be decided. However, powerful artifacts such as the Doomsday Shield will be taken from the incompetent. Because according to the Holisturation, only outstanding heroes can enjoy powerful privileges. Sam categorically denied his involvement in dragon poaching, calling it empty talk. Instead, he offered low-ranking materials for sale to newcomers, under the guise of courtesy. Having said everything he wished, the venerable nobleman left the room. The Dorg was unpleasantly impressed by Sam Holisteratius's behavior. Even Julian looked much nicer against his background. In principle, the visit to this family was due precisely to the fact that the scoundrels are playing a dishonest game. Other heroes, because of people like them, were in serious trouble, forced to enrich poachers. If we look at it in perspective, in a great war, because of this, only the nobles will win. Even Aiden was upset that his long-standing impressions of his idols were now shattered. It was his reaction that somewhat comforted the King of Hell, because it once again emphasized the young man's pure soul. But now, it was finally clear how wars were won every 100 years. With the desire to mock him a little, Durg reminded the receptionist of Sam's plans for him. Soon the hunt will begin for the unknown hero, the Dragon Slayer. This reminder scared Aiden to death. He knew perfectly well that he would simply be destroyed. But the calm reaction of the interlocutor instantly made the hysteria subside. The demon suggested taking a break for the masked hero, during which he could work on the armory. But the King of Hell simply did not want to leave the territory of the Holisturatia estate. He planned some activities for the night. This was supposed to finally solve the problem of poaching. When the moon rose in the sky, everything around sparkled with brighter colors. Even Dorg appreciated the luxurious conditions in which the noble family lived. The King of Hell aspired to the same position among human society. While he mentally made plans for the future, the former receptionist worried about being noticed. They committed illegal acts, and therefore, they could very well end up in prison. The young man didn't understand that Durg had taken care of all the nuances of the mission. He believed that he and his mentor were in a vulnerable position in the middle of the palace's main square, and he was incredibly scared when he saw the guards heading towards them. It was urgent to hide somewhere to avoid a collision, but the satellite did not move. Cold sweat began to run down the boy's forehead. But, to his great surprise, the guards passed by without paying them any attention. Only then did Aiden realize that they were moving under the protection of an invisibility spell. The Deorg didn't want to waste any more time on procrastination and explanations, so he simply moved on. The former receptionist, looking after him, was filled with even more love. From now on, he decided that he would never question his mentor's abilities. They walked the endless roads and corridors of the palace, but never found any trace of the dragons. Aiden began to lose patience and faith in success, but Alex, who was ahead, still did not return. And although by all laws they were now committing a dishonorable act, the young man saw nothing wrong with it. After meeting Sam, even his hero status did not hinder his search for justice. The former receptionist was ready to commit any crime, especially if it is aimed at exposing villains. And Durg will personally plan it, because for the boy, he was the real hero. The King of Hell, shocked by such a revelation, stopped. He was not yet called good. In fact, it was even pleasant, so he decided not to destroy his ward's idea of himself. The fruitful collaboration of their tandem really provided evidence that Aiden had a chance to succeed. And this was only the beginning of a path, at the end of which the light now shone brightly for the young man. Low self-esteem left the boy's body forever, and was replaced by hope. He was ready to carry out any order of the King of Hell, without understanding his true identity. This was his modest contribution to the well-being of his family, the younger ones who depended on him. Aiden believed that they were destined to become great heroes, and that they would have to work hard to achieve this. And, as his father had once said, now he saw that they had a chance to defeat the King of Hell. After which, the Muden family will enter the annals of heroic chronicles and will no longer be discriminated against. The disinterestedness of his ward's speech and thoughts surprised Durg. It turned out that the young man had no ambitions at all for his own future. He was satisfied only with material goods that would be useful to his family. I wanted to be a driver of change for the better, with a vision for many generations to come. Therefore, he was not at all embarrassed or frightened by cooperation, even with the forces of evil. And the King of Hell really liked it. You could say he was delighted. Alex interrupted the thoughts about the future with his appearance. He teleported alongside his master, ready to deliver the news. It turned out that after several hours of searching, he did manage to find the hideout. It was a secret room in the palace where all the poaching equipment was kept. In it, the demon also found a list of members of the alliance that Sam had spoken about during the day. Strangely, all the surnames on this list began with the prefix Holy. 76 families of pure-blood heroes were implicated in illegal dragon hunting. Aiden's idea of the honor of high-ranking warriors had been significantly shaken. Their hands were up to their elbows in blood. The secret room itself, as it turned out, was underwater, on which about half of the palace stood. Using his power, Alex constructed satellites around the heads, something like spacesuits. The confused boy watched as his powerful companions jumped into the water without hesitation. This indicated that one could feel safe inside this bubble. Therefore, the former receptionist cast aside all doubts and followed the example of his mentor. It turned out that the depth of this lake was very significant. After a few seconds, Aiden realized that he could breathe underwater, and the panic instantly subsided. Having descended to the very bottom, the young man saw treasures that they tried to hide from the eyes of strangers. Bound by strong chains, the imprisoned dragons were still alive. For the powerful creatures, it was real torture, because they were sustained by precious scales. When the last piece was removed, the prisoners were treated to repeat the process. It was a disgusting and terrifying factory that breathed and felt pain, but could not free itself. The oldest representative of the dragon species had been in this position for over 200 years. He was covered in scars left by bloodthirsty human beings. Now the fury of the children of the Golden Goddess was not difficult to understand. They united against the people because of the great suffering of their relatives and the impossibility of freeing them. From the dragon's perspective, even an incomprehensible parasite was better than a race of greedy killers. Since they had come here for the scales, Alex wanted to get it over with quickly. The demon tore one off with his hands as quickly as possible so as not to cause the creature any lasting pain. Together with Aiden, they swam away from this, unknown to most, hideout of criminals. But Durg was in no hurry. He was extremely struck by this picture of excessive suffering. He didn't want to let such a crime go unpunished or without consequences. A second later, the King of Hell finally decided to deprive the Pure Blood Alliance of income. In front of his shocked companions, he began the process of freeing the prisoners. The broken chains fell to the bottom, and the dragons gradually began to taste freedom again. A loud growl echoed across the lake. A second later, the winged monsters spread their bodies. They wanted revenge. Years of imprisonment have made some of them almost insane. Alex, watching the incredible spectacle, just held his breath in admiration. The last captive, whose child had been killed, was the first to emerge from the underwater depths. She didn't intend to fly far and landed on one of the palace buildings, waiting for reinforcements. The shocked guards, who, moreover, knew perfectly well about the secret hideout, began to scream in horror. One powerful pillar of flame destroyed everyone in the monster's field of vision. The other members of the Dragon Pack also kept up with their colleague. They even destroyed the walls of the palace of the family that imprisoned them, thereby erasing all the gains accumulated over 60,000 years. People had nowhere to hide, no matter how much they wanted to. The Diorg and his company peeked out onto the surface just in the midst of their revenge. Alex, having recovered from his state of shock, now realized that such an act would guarantee them new problems. The King of Hell was guided only by his feelings of justice and anger regarding the situation. While the two demons were arguing again about what should or shouldn't be done, Aiden looked back. On the other side of the reservoir, winged giants destroyed everything they saw, leaving no survivors. Alex's timid caution was not in vain. For Julian, the culprits were obvious. He saw with his own eyes, not far from him, the same scoundrels he had met before. The hated brat with white hair was the hero's main target. The same desire for revenge appeared in Julian's father, who also managed to escape. Sam was incredibly furious, not understanding the sin behind it. He considered the destruction of his property a crime. The greatness of House Holostura was now being destroyed by dragons through the efforts of this trio. Aiden was the first to spot the palace's owners and hurried to warn his mentor. The argument between the demons immediately stopped. Everyone looked back at their now sworn enemies. It was obvious that a fight to the death was brewing. The Durg smiled predatorily, inviting Julian to repeat the past experience. The boy responded with hatred, like his father, who barely restrained himself from rushing forward. Only Aiden was beside himself with the possibility of such a quick death before he had even reached his goal. The Callistarats attacked first, two at once. They believed that this way they would gain an advantage. They could no longer think clearly, so they did not pay attention to what was happening around them. And it was a mistake, because the oldest prisoner decided to take revenge for his torture. The giant dragon closed its mouth on the bodies of the purebloods, ending that family name forever. Of course, he didn't touch his rescuers, so all he could do was thank them for their rescue and say goodbye. Realizing that this was the perfect chance to escape, Alex suggested doing just that. The chaos and panic around them could have made them completely invisible to the locals. Thanks to the help of the dragons, there were no witnesses left to the presence of the three unknowns. The fall of the House of Holosturatius, described a few years later, did not state the clear reasons for what happened. Even though Sam and Julian were destroyed, Aiden decided to follow his mentor's plan. The role of an unknown hero had to be left in the past for a while, and he had to devote himself to the armory. The opening turned out to be grandiose, with more and more heroes flocking to the building. They were eager to replenish their arsenal and complained about slow service. Aiden tried to be polite and kind despite the aggression. Trade was booming. The soldiers bought everything they wanted, noting that they had never seen such an assortment in person before. Alex, who helped with consultations, skillfully charmed buyers with successful compliments. The demon offered favorable discounts when necessary. Dorg watched what was happening from the mountain, as is typical of owners of large businesses. Although things were going extremely well, he still didn't feel particularly satisfied. The King of Hell thought that having a lot of money in the human world would make him happy. But now he understood that he had to find a new dopamine for himself. After telling Aiden that he was leaving the store to him, he headed for the break room. Alex did a good job on the interior of the Lord's chambers, who walked slowly through the rooms, examining the details. Finally finding the bedroom, Durg lay down on the bed with a smile. Sleep had worn him out before his brain had time to realize it. In the boy's dreams, a golden dragon came to him and silently stood by his bed. He didn't immediately realize that the woman was standing before him in reality. The young man suggested that she take the list of the conspirators' alliance and deal with them alone. But the goddess refused, saying that she knew them all by name and without unnecessary documentation. The Deorg believed that after recent events, she would suggest that he unite against the people. And he immediately noted that he was not going to do this for free. Moreover, the torment of her children lasted not 1 or 2 years, but more than 200. The dragons suffered, and their goddess did absolutely nothing, but rather signed off on neutrality. That is why, ignoring her will, some individuals decided to act independently, at their own discretion. The goddess denied everything, saying that the path of the parasite was not the path of her nation. The connection with the purple substance that turned dragons into zombies was humiliating for their species. By her logic, no dragon would voluntarily mate with a fungus. It was more like an inventive curse that someone else had a hand in. And this someone remained in the shadows, taking advantage of the situation that was developing in the arena. The Deorg, having listened to the speech of his interlocutor, exploded with sudden anger. She had no intention of acting. The young man wanted her to finally call together all her enemies and deal with them on her own. The King of Hell was not satisfied with conditions, rules, agreements, and laws. It made everything complicated. If the situation could be resolved faster and easier, he preferred to do so. He wanted peace and quiet, but the goddess only laughed in response. For the first time in her life, the demon lord did not seek the destruction of the world. Surprised by the sudden mockery directed at him, Durg no longer wanted to communicate. Making an obscene gesture, he advised the woman to let the situation go. In any case, even if there was some conspiracy, dragons are much stronger than humans. But this time, too, the intuition of the King of Hell failed him. The goddess noted that this matter was not so simple because the purity of the blood was involved. The guy was once again convinced that the woman and Alex were like brother and sister in their beliefs. For the first time, he heard a logical response. He had not yet seen a major war. Unlike the young man, they were both there and saw the pure blood do its thing. On that decisive day, people always go all the way, despite the losses. They rise up despite all the blows with one goal, to win. The rebellion will not stop until a hero appears and completes what is destined. Like locusts, one by one the chosen ones will sacrifice themselves to the killing machine, determining the best. The endless stream eventually becomes exhausting, which is why they won almost 670 times. On that day, she said, Durg would also understand where this fear of the human race comes from. In 20 years, everything will change significantly, and the boy will feel it firsthand. On that day, the opponents will not be mere mortals. They will be nourished by the courage, strength, and skill of all ancestors, preserved in pure blood. Now it was the turn of the King of Hell to laugh at the goddess's statements. He remembered Aiden's face. That young man could not have survived the transformation that the golden dragon described. All of the above led Durg to the logical idea of destroying the purebloods now. He thought he could break the rules and increase his chances of winning that way. The young man seemed to be consulting with the goddess of dragons, which made her incredibly surprised. She did not understand his circumstances. Therefore, the demon said that he had been awakened without any explanation, that important truths were being hidden from him. The Darg couldn't even understand the reason for the war. Why even fuel this conflict every 100 years? During the passionate speech, the golden dragon had the impression that the boy in front of her was not completely insane. But from the boy's point of view, all the events predicted by those around him were completely meaningless. The motif was the blessed surface of the earth and the cursed dungeons, but there was still life in them. God's inconsistent actions caused a conflict of interest that could have been avoided and lived happily. And what was most annoying was that only Durg himself asked such profound questions. He even wanted to understand the identity of the creator, which incredibly angered the golden dragon. Questions poured out of the boy's mouth one after another. Eventually, the goddess got tired of messing with him, and she even regretted coming. Falling onto the bed, Durg continued his confused and angry speech in despair. Having calmed down a little, the King of Hell announced that he wanted to be alone. But the woman was in no hurry to comply with his demands. She felt an inexplicable sympathy for the young man. The goddess insisted on her request to find the culprits of infecting her children with mycelium. The interlocutor didn't really want to get into any trouble again for the sake of others. But the golden dragon hinted that Alex could help him with this because she knew more. Once, more than 10,000 years ago, he almost destroyed the dragon race by leading a rebellion. The Duke of the Underworld was not the same and simple. Amazed, Durg recalled everything Alex had told him about himself, statements that he perceived as fables. Leaving the interlocutor in deep thought, the goddess created a portal. In her opinion, the King of Hell's thoughts weren't so absurd, he was just digging deep. As soon as the portal disappeared and silence fell in the room, a new stress burst into Durg's life. Alex burst into the bedroom with an announcement of more problems. In his hands was a test tube with a small amount of the same mycelium that was just mentioned. Unlike its owner, the demon learned this information now from the buyers. It turned out that this puppet-like hell mushroom can only be grown in the underground kingdom, and only one representative of the race could control this substance. One of the 7 dukes, expert on all poisons and foul sores on the body of the earth and humanity. Maurice's involvement in this whole affair cast a shadow over the demon kingdom. The Durg simply exploded, this circumstance destroying all his plans. The ugly situation forced the King of Hell to come up with a scenario of excuses in the event of obvious accusations. If exposed, their involvement could incite civil war between dragons and humans. I immediately remembered the goddess's words about Alex's ingenuity and strategic thinking. He, of course, denied his participation in the spread of the mycelium because he operated in other categories. Moreover, if he had been aware, Durg would have been among those familiar with this matter. During his first encounter with the infected dragon, the demon began to suspect something. But then he did not consider it advisable to share his suspicions with the ruler. Now, as he explained his thoughts to the King of Hell, he was obviously met with disbelief. Because no one would enjoy a clash between 2 old enemies more than the underworld. But it was precisely this obviousness that made Alex doubt. The whole thing was sewn with white threads. Maurice had been intimately acquainted with the cunning Duke for many thousands of years. They were even brothers in the Great War. Based on the characteristics of the poison expert, it seemed like this was someone's insidious plan. The Durg decided to stop the idle chatter and invite Maurice for questioning. But Alex made it clear that he had outdone him in this desire. He was in his lair but found no one there. The suspect fled in an unknown direction. The King of Hell was completely dissatisfied with the situation. He demanded respect for himself. Suddenly, the boy's anger turned into a fit of self-disappointment and helplessness. Watching the owner, Alex suddenly began to suspect that what was happening was specifically his. Only the Durg himself could tell the demons and dukes what to do, especially since the ruler's actions have recently seemed particularly unpredictably destructive. After destroying a noble pureblood family and providing a list of conspirators to the goddess, he began the confrontation. Now opponents will kill each other, forgetting about their feud with demons. For the first time in history, no alliance is possible between any of the nations. All are acting as isolated as possible. And assuming that the young man who is now feigning helplessness is behind everything, the situation was astonishing. Alex realized that all this time, he could have doubted the most talented ruler of hell in history. Because with this arrangement, they looked not like provocateurs but saviors, the main heroes and peacemakers. It was at the hands of Durg that the conspiracy of the purebloods against the dragon race was exposed and the prisoners were freed. In this context, the king's decision to leave home and office and rise to the land became understandable. Alex remembered all the words the Lord had said about the world he found himself in. At the time, it seemed absurd and naive. But it could also happen that the Duke of the Underworld did not listen attentively to his lord. Realizing the full extent of his wrongdoing, the demon fell to his knees, apologizing for his behavior. The Durg did not understand what had suddenly happened and what had caused such changes. Alex presented his guesses so vaguely in response that the young man did not understand anything at all. But the guy didn't have the strength to deal with it. The demon, as compensation for the distrust, promised not to tell anyone about the master's plans. The King of Hell, upon hearing such commitments and promises, immediately agreed he was not concerned with the reasons. He wanted only one thing: to be left alone. Alex immediately rushed out of the room. The Dorg stopped his subordinate at the entrance to the portal with a question about the reality of God's existence, but he considered it indisputable. Unlike the guy who considered the lack of reaction to his escape as proof of his absence, Alex finally even said that he had seen the Creator in person, even though it was from afar. The great speed and distance made identification impossible. This nullified the entire conversation that had begun so promisingly. The Diorg drove his former mentor away screaming, unable to bear his presence any longer. Left alone, the boy fell onto the bed, trying to piece together all the data. It all seemed like a conspiracy involving Maurice to sow chaos between dragons and humans. He and Alex seemed to be caught between two fires on the side of good. And thereby, they became a target for both sides of the discontent. But with the same success, it could have been the work of the purebloods themselves. Their cunning was amazing. In this case, the role of the King of Hell in this matter was incidental. There was a third version of events. It was all the plan of the Golden Dragon. Then this cunning bitch was to be avoided at all costs. In any case, it was Durg and Alex who looked their best in these circumstances. 20 years before the Great War, the King of Hell could profitably turn the majority opinion in his favor. This was their chance to take control of someone else's game. After all, if that failed, one could always kill the dissenters. The next morning at the armory began with a visit from uninvited guests. Aiden immediately recognized the arrogant girl. It was May. His classmate from Hero Elementary School sighed meaningfully when she was introduced. It turned out that this was the same A-rank pureblood that Alex had once mentioned. She visited the armory to verify the rumors about Aiden's sponsorship. The arrogance almost instantly faded from her face when she saw the Durg's gaze on her. At first, the girl thought it was because of curiosity related to her status. But the brazen response of the unknown rich man offended her sense of dignity. According to May, she did not participate in the battle with the dragons because it was a task for a different rank. Aiden, who did not want to conflict, also supported this girl. He didn't notice her from his superior attitude towards him, even now, when envy clouded her eyes. In fact, the girl's generosity was shown. May herself would like to get a rich sponsor. The Dorg noted that before you get something, you need to show what you are capable of. Outraged by the harsh response, Milady drew her sword, demanding satisfaction, but Aiden stopped her. Then, taking the opportunity to avoid a real fight, she hurriedly left. Finally, sarcastically noting that her friend still hasn't passed the blood test. This was big news for the King of Hell. He had heard of such a thing for the first time. Because Aiden himself had previously assured him that he had an F rank, and there was no point in talking about it. Now it turned out that this test was paid, and the young man could not afford it at the time. He only completed the free heroic classes at the academy. May sincerely believed that geniuses like her achieved success without any additional classes or payments. To which Dorg rightly remarked that anyway, only the rich achieve success. The capabilities of individual purebred families automatically overshadowed the individual achievements of their descendants. The girl insisted that no matter what, good heroes earn money because the ordinary population needs them. And those who did not want to do this were granted independence with the support of the department. In Aiden's case, he himself refused to make any attempts in this direction. The definition of blood could change the fate of their entire lineage, but only if it is higher than F. Otherwise, all the money spent will be wasted and will drag the family into debt. The Durgus was tired of listening to the endless stream of words from the arrogant girl, so he cut off the dialogue. The King of Hell ordered his ward to immediately close the armory and go after him. Together with Alex, the three of them had to visit the department to determine the blood type of their hero. Sometime later, they were standing near a large, elegant building. Inside, they were met by a secretary who accepted their registration application. He was so unfriendly that he dryly gave the company a number and told them to wait their turn. At first, his manner of communication drove Durg into a stupor. But in a second, the King of Hell was ready to tear him to pieces for disrespect. Aiden was given number 45 and was eagerly awaiting the call. The silence didn't last long, as another visitor entered the hall. He was let in without waiting in line, and it seemed unfair to Durg. Aiden explained that he was one of the strongest and most respected warriors in the district, and he was aiming for G rank. As it turned out during the conversation, May also had no rank. Everyone expected her to leave her father by force. But the renewed outrage at her behavior was interrupted by the secretary's announcement that they were being invited to an audience. The department employee carefully studied Aiden's questionnaire data for several minutes. Sniffing something under his breath, the man confirmed that the visitor had not undergone a blood test. But judging by his family, it was useless to expect outstanding results. Without further ado, the manager announced that he was ready to give the young man an F rank. The King of Hell immediately objected to this. The department employee justified his decision by saving visitors' time. But Durg insisted, noting that he was ready to conduct a full-fledged analysis for money. 5 gold coins were thrown on the table with a demand to fulfill their duties. The King of Hell could no longer stand the profit-seeking approach to everything in this world. The manager silently stood up and left the room. Everyone froze in anticipation. Despite the rage that filled him, Durg believed he was doing the absolutely right thing. This was a chance to change Aiden's entire life in a matter of minutes. The department employee returned with a strange-looking object and placed it on the table. He reported that this item does all the work of recognizing the percentage of blood purity. To start the process, all you had to do was place your hand on the crystal. Aiden resolutely extended his hand and did what was required of him. Suddenly, a red, bright light illuminated the entire office, and from the bottom of the device came a note with detailed calculations. At the end of the piece of paper, 10, even almost 11% was stamped. The shocked manager backed away without saying a word. The Durg could not stand the silence and began to ask what it all meant. The King of Hell couldn't figure out whether 10% was enough or too much to get a good rank. The man cautiously replied that it was probably a technical error, and he was uncomfortable reporting it. He offered to take the test for a fee, but Aiden didn't see the point, because of which the department employee immediately grabbed the questionnaire, ready to confirm the F rank. The Durg stood in the way of this, demanding honest work for his money, which the cunning one had already received. He saw that the interlocutor was nervous and understood that it was not just like that. It was necessary to find out the reason. It turned out that the situation was very interesting. Aiden was a 4th-generation hero. And according to statistics, even among the 5th generation, the maximum level fluctuated around 9. Even D-rank dragon fighters could only get a 6 on the test, which indicated a mistake. The King of Hell realized that the situation was now favorable for bargaining, so he began to insist on the B rank. If it was impossible to accept B, he was willing to accept Class D. The manager resisted any suggestions other than to confirm the class of the Muden family. Not wanting to give away the money a second time for nothing, Durg suggested a bet. He demanded the return of 5 gold pieces if the first indicator was confirmed. The employee began to turn to personalities and hint at the dishonest intentions of the interlocutor. He accused the King of Hell of taking advantage of poor, low-ranking heroes. And when he doesn't get the desired result, he changes one candidate to another. The man disagreed with the test because he didn't believe that the lowest purebreds in the chain could grow so tall. Silence fell in the room, during which Durg tried to calm himself. After a short silence, he proposed his bet again. While not refusing to pay, he also wanted his counterclaims met. The manager was sweating from the thought. For him, 5 gold coins was a large sum. The man doubted the first result, but there was a 1% chance that it was true. In the end, he agreed to write down a grade of C on Aiden's application. Citing concern for the boy's future, even though it was a lie, he wanted to get rid of the visitors. The King of Hell, after considering the prospects a little, nevertheless agreed to the proposal. A moment later, a note about assigning the boy a rank of C appeared on Aiden's questionnaire. Now, officially, the boy has become a member of the Heroic Corps. On the street, Durg and Alex discussed the officials' strange behavior. Everyone seemed greedy to them. While they were having a conversation, the former receptionist was pacing behind them, looking at his new ID. He couldn't believe his eyes. His entire life flashed through his mind, all the mockery from his peers and elders. Years of hunger and searching for any work to feed my brothers. Only one caring person did something for him in his life, and that was Lord Durg Deus. Today, under his guidance, Aiden has reached unprecedented heights. Therefore, he deserved all the good feelings that now burned in the former receptionist's soul. The boy promised that he would dedicate his life to serving this noble patron. He believed with all his heart that it was no accident that he had come across such precious guests. But he didn't want to be separated from them for a day. The young man did not know that in a month he would be forced to save the world. Of course, not alone, but in the wonderful company of Dorg and Alex. An incredibly majestic divine guardian will descend to Earth to carry out a mission of destruction. These will be the consequences of the King of Hell's refusal to resign from his position, which he has been waiting for so long. After officially confirming the status of the hero, the first mission had to be found. Therefore, the company went to the task board, near which a crowd of heroes had gathered. It was necessary to choose a case for the first time that would adequately announce the guy to society. A thorough study of all advertisements began, and there were really many of them. Suddenly, the King of Hell saw an announcement about the defeat of the Sea Maiden. He had heard such a thing for the first time. Alex explained that this creature was half man, half fish, of gigantic size. They were bloodthirsty killers who preyed mostly on fishermen. The decision was made very quickly. That's where the company was headed. The next day, near the fishing village, Durg was already giving his instructions to Aiden. From the hill, it was clearly visible how almost all the buildings were on fire. It seemed illogical. Alex reported that for some reason, people find flames to be a deterrent to these monsters. But that was a terrible mistake. Because such confidence, in most cases, cost the lives of the locals, precisely because of their actions. They died a horrible death in the fire, and the Sea Maidens got theirs. The same thing was happening now. The monsters did not feel the heat of the flames at all and rushed at the inhabitants. People had to show great dexterity to save their loved ones. Without the presence of a hero, men could not offer worthy resistance to the monsters. The predators understood this well and hurried to complete the planned task before the heroes arrived. While the lives of the fishermen hung in the balance, the battle strategy was being decided on the hill. The Durg held the view that this time Aiden would handle everything on his own, without the intervention of demons. This assumption frightened the boy, but he did not dare to contradict his sponsor. From now on, the young man was an official hero in the eyes of society, and therefore he should not avoid trials. The King of Hell noticed that among those present, only the former receptionist was considered an official warrior. And this discovery unexpectedly cheered up the latter. With the help of the Durg, Aiden remembered his exploits in the fight to destroy the Mad Dragons. Now he had to prove to his mentors that he was worth all the effort put into him. Below, hundreds of innocent residents in distress were waiting for the boy, and no one could help them except Aiden. In the end, the former receptionist promised that he would give his all for the sake of his family. He rushed to the fishing village without a shadow of a doubt. The King of Hell sincerely believed that this mission would be a rebirth for his once inept ward. Alex kept his eyes on the Lord all this time, worried about the Durg's behavior. Remembering the last conversation between them, the demon decided that this was the same double game he had guessed. The situation in the fishing village became increasingly tense. Buildings engulfed in flames and monsters chasing their victims drove people into a stalemate. Gradually, the number of those killed increased. Like true predators, the Sea Maidens destroyed the strongest first. Then they dealt with the weaker ones. The women and children went for dessert. Aiden appeared just in time before another killing of the innocent and defenseless. With the help of his shield, he pushed the monster dozens of meters away from him. The boy and the woman, who were already saying goodbye to life, could barely breathe from horror. They saw that instead of one monster, several appeared in front of the newcomer. Since he didn't even move, it could be assumed that a real hero had arrived. Aiden quickly introduced himself and announced that from now on, the locals need not be afraid. The fishermen began to spread the news to their fellow villagers by word of mouth. until it reached the older generation of locals. Then the joy immediately gave way to doubts about the guy's competence. The elders did not believe in the strength of the newcomer at all and complained about the consequences for themselves in the event of defeat. Aiden immediately rushed to calm them down, forgetting about the real danger behind them. But she reminded herself in a moment. A powerful blow knocked the former receptionist off his feet. Thanking the higher powers, he managed to cover his body with a shield. Despite this, feeling severe pain, the young man flew across the square, contemplating his next steps. Aiden fell to the ground near several locals who had barely managed to run away. The sea maidens rushed forward with the aim of killing the annoying defender of their prey. People immediately began encouraging each other to flee. This was the only option for them to survive in this hell on earth. Those who were more agile immediately heeded the advice, so to speak, and the wounded and the weaker ones left hope in their hearts for their savior. Feeling responsible for the people, he rushed forward again. He wanted to hold the monster back until the injured and wounded could reach safety. The fight started quite quickly, with Aiden throwing punches and avoiding being beaten himself. To be honest, the guy himself didn't expect to gain such strength. But the joy was short-lived, as one of the three opponents counterattacked again, and the young man fell to the ground spitting blood. Despite the damage, it was impossible to stop, because the second monster was already flying to finish what the first had started. By some miracle, the young hero managed to escape swift destruction. It was necessary to urgently regroup, especially since the third representative of the fish species had already thrown its trident at him. Aiden managed to dodge this attack as well, but he immediately counterattacked his opponent with his shield. Doomsday did its job as best it could, knocking the monster off balance. Following the first, the same fate befell the second. Taking advantage of the fact that the man had no eyes on his back, the third monster grabbed him by the legs. The mermaid began to beat the boy against the ground, throwing him in all directions. The worst thing about this situation was that it was almost impossible to find an opportunity for release. Aiden could only defend himself with his shield and hope for a good moment. Thank God he turned up for the guy soon after. Following his henchman, the third monster fell to the ground from the impact. In the heat of battle, the newly minted hero completely dispersed without even noticing it. He darted around his opponents, attacking them like a bee. The speed gradually increased, as did the power of the blows. But the opponents still had the advantage of numbers. Because of this, the young man was critically lacking the attention to follow them all. He received painful blows to the back that slowed him down for a while. One of these seemed to catch him so off guard that it completely disoriented him. The mermaid threw him several meters into the remains of the shattered building. The people who remained in the square and hoped for protection held their breath. It was unclear whether Aiden was alive and whether they would survive the day. Meanwhile, on the hill, the demons watched what was happening in the fishing village. It became obvious to them that the protege, who could not even hold a sword in his hands, had made great progress. But they didn't plan to intervene now, when the receptionist was possibly on the verge of death. The fisherman felt great relief when a minute later the hero ran out into the street. He was determined to continue the fight despite his injuries. The bloodthirsty killers tried to use the same tactic against the guy, to surround him. The resistance was fierce, but Aiden tried to hold on. He understood that he was the only support for innocent people who found themselves in a difficult situation. Therefore, despite all the difficulties, the boy gritted his teeth and resisted this onslaught. At some point, there were even more opponents. A whole crowd of sea maidens rushed to the aid of their henchmen. They rushed at the hero from all sides, trying to tear him apart. But by some miracle, the young man's body almost mechanically avoided the blows. It all came down to instincts. He completely trusted his feelings and acted accordingly. Now, when necessary, the former receptionist allowed himself to avoid confrontations. He maneuvered so deftly that at some points his opponents were forced to look for him. But the number of scoundrels again played into their hands. One of the fishmen pounced on Aiden and grabbed him from behind in a vice grip. But although the trap was strong, the hero's rage this time turned out to be greater. Using the power of the shield, he was able to quickly unhook the monster's claws. Having escaped the encirclement, Aiden began tactics of attrition against the enemy. He flew across the square, scattering the mermaids around him and preventing them from concentrating. This proved effective, and the young man had a window to catch his breath. At first, the audience had the impression that the monsters were finished, and Aiden himself sincerely wished for this. But gradually, one by one, the scoundrels began to rise to their feet. It turned out that no matter how hard the hero tried to resist, it was ineffective. He hoped that another such maneuver would help him win, but he didn't know if he would have enough strength. Alex held his breath. He didn't notice how much he was fascinated by watching this battle. The demon was worried about Aiden and wanted to help him. But the King of Hell had a different opinion. He believed more in the abilities of the former receptionist. Once again, the young man found himself on the ground. One of the giants was already dangerously close to him, so there was no time for respite. Aiden realized with a seventh sense that he urgently needed to activate the shield in a special way. Gradually, in the boy's hands, the artifact turned into a kind of boomerang. He shattered his opponent's weapons like he was breaking matches. This continued until another stab in the back occurred. This time, the wound seemed more serious. It was hard to tell where the young man was that wasn't already injured. Aiden felt his entire back fill with blood. It wasn't just a standard scratch, but something more serious. Meanwhile, the monsters attacked him from all sides, realizing that they had almost killed their opponent. The blows came one after another, and the boy barely had time to shield himself from the monsters. Unable to bear the burden any longer, he began to beg for help. People nearby saw that the hero was in a difficult situation and did not know what to do. They are accustomed to this day, not making any effort to save themselves by participating in battles. The bravest of those present was the boy whom Aiden rescued first. He rushed to the aid of his savior, encouraging others to follow his example. The brave hearts of the young people motivated their fellow villagers to action. They ran towards the monsters they were incredibly afraid of without hesitation. Taking advantage of the fact that the monsters were completely focused on beating the hero, ordinary fishermen were able to contain them on their own. They urged Aiden to take immediate action while the monsters were blocked. The guy didn't need to be asked twice. He immediately announced his readiness. One by one, he eliminated his opponents. Severed limbs and body parts flew across the square as evidence of his impending victory. Suddenly, Aiden heard a scream behind him. It was the same grandfather who had doubted him, and now he needed help. One of the sea maidens grabbed the unfortunate man by the neck, preparing to eliminate him. There was no way to run and help. The distance was too great. Only the shield remained, which, in an incredible way, changed in the hero's hand. He released the artifact from his hands again, like a boomerang, and it pierced the monster through and through. Having finished everything rather quickly, the Day of Judgment returned to the young man's forearm. This effect fit very well into the context of the battle and made it easier. Because now, there was no longer any need to stick to close combat to destroy opponents. All the villains surrounding the hero became ideal targets for the boomerang's work. Fortunately, the artifact managed to return to its owner before it was damaged. The shield covered him from the insidious attack. And he did it more than once, which impressed the owner now. The promise in another dimension inspired trust. On Aiden's orders, the artifact destroyed this enemy as well, accelerating to unprecedented speed. After the elimination of the Sea Maidens, Doomsday was upon the Master's hand faster than he could blink. The area was cleared. People were safe here. The boy immediately looked at his protector and faithful brother. He understood perfectly well that without the shield, he would have been dead a long time ago, so he sincerely thanked him for saving him. And the residents of the fishing village thanked the young hero for their rescue. The screams of monsters in the distance announced that this was far from the end. The fishermen were still in danger. Something had to be done immediately. Therefore, Aiden immediately rushed to the sound, not expecting an invitation to battle. But now his new assistants were running alongside him, and without wanting it, the hero became the leader of the entire resistance. This change in people's behavior interested the King of Hell. It turned out that the young man encourages others to take active actions, like a true motivator. This is probably what the same heroes everyone around him was talking about looked like. Alex, of course, did not like such changes, because it indicated an unpleasant progress of the human race. But Dorg felt, on the contrary, a pleasant warmth from this spectacle. The ward grew several heads before his eyes, and this caused pride, because it was also his merit. The King of Hell even wanted the hero to become even stronger, because it brought a smile to his face and increased his self-esteem in the eyes of society. Again, Dirk caught himself thinking that he liked this little guy. But Alex did not like such revelations at all and raised doubts about the adequacy of the ruler. Surprisingly, the new confrontation did not last very long. With the help of his artifact's new property, Aiden quickly dealt with all the enemies. All that remained was to celebrate the victory, rest, and treat the wounded. The fishermen thanked their savior for the interruption. They believed that the monsters would never return to their village after such a massacre. Among all the thanks that rang out around, the apology from the grandfather, who doubted the hero's abilities, stood out. Everyone who held the same opinion under the influence of a chain reaction followed his example. Aiden was incredibly pleased. He had never felt such personal recognition. And so he was ashamed and emphasized that he did not take into account what he heard about himself. At sunset, the boy finally made it to his mentor's makeshift camp. Covered in blood, his own and others, he still listened to the approval of his work. The opinion of Dirk Aiden was far more precious than anything he had heard before. He talked about how the nature of his fighting changed and how his abilities grew dramatically in the process. He spoke about the overwhelming support from the local population, which surprised him at a difficult time. This gave the boy strength he had never felt before and opened up new opportunities. This feeling remained in the young man's soul as an unsurpassed memory of his own power. Watching the smile on his ward's face, the King of Hell was happier than ever. He liked that Aiden enjoyed these fights, not just a boring experience. Since the task was successfully completed, it was time to go home. Especially considering the incredible hunger Dirk was feeling, he missed a plate of noodles. It turned out that local residents provided a letter of recommendation for completing the task. Now, for this mission, one could receive a monetary reward, which the former receptionist was extremely happy about. The mentor immediately noted that he had nothing to do with the reward because he had not participated in it. Therefore, Aiden was to take the 3 silver coins and spend them on whatever he wanted. Alex reminded the young man of his plans to study his younger ones. From now on, he will have such an opportunity, and the first award is the first step towards his cherished dream. Taking this as a great generosity on my part, the boy agreed to cook food for his mentors until tomorrow morning. He considered these two to be his angels who had come down from heaven in answer to his prayers. A little later, having opened the dining room, he fulfilled the request of 2 hungry demons and several visitors. Having satisfied his unbearable desire to eat to his heart's content, Dirk finally felt an improvement in his mood. He reminded me once again that Aiden's main talent was cooking. An unexpectedly beautiful guest attracted the attention of everyone present at the establishment. It was the Golden Dragon herself, and she wanted to try the noodles. The goddess came to check on how things were going and didn't hide it at all. Dirk was glad that he had time to say goodbye to Alex before she arrived. He reliably guarded the secret of their plan to find Maurice. Alex has been doing this all his free time, but so far without success. He was already dissatisfied with all the side tasks that distracted him from the main business, and so he constantly muttered under his breath, not daring to openly make a remark to his master. The Dirk understood that no one but the 2 of them needed to know about such involvement of the underworld. Therefore, Aiden's intervention in the conversation with the goddess was appropriate. The young man politely introduced himself and officially declared himself a hero. The Golden Dragon, in response, identified herself as the priestess of the temple, without going into details. She carefully examined all of the boy's injuries and noticed that Dirk was treating him terribly. This reaction only made the young man laugh. In response, he noted that he found the interlocutors the same. And while the mentor and the priestess wished each other death in their minds, he placed an order before the visitor. The Golden Dragon's opinion was no different from the words of the King of Hell. Aiden had talent. The woman was curious about what rank the guy got today, because she already knew about the test itself. When the goddess heard the information about 10%, she almost choked with surprise. The young man immediately noticed that most likely the machine was broken, which is why it was giving such indicators. The golden dragon found this information very interesting. She understood perfectly well that with such purity of blood, the boy could destroy demons forever. When she said this out loud, she immediately encountered resistance from the king of hell. He emphasized that the young man was only from the 4th generation, not from the 0 generation. From the point of view of the golden dragon, this did not in any way negate the likelihood of such a confrontation. A heated argument broke out between the interlocutors, during which they behaved in exactly the same way. In the end, Durg gave up first. The presence of this woman immediately made his mood worse. Suddenly, the goddess remembered the reason for her coming to the dining room. In front of the astonished king of hell, she pulled an extremely terrifying weapon from the hem of her dress. It was a sword called the Destroyer of Fates. She had acquired it in honor of passing the exam. The Doerg, feeling an inexplicable pull, snatched the artifact from the golden dragon's hands. On a subconscious level, he understood and felt the pull of darkness from the object he held in his hands. The goddess watched his reaction with a smile. This sword was created from the flesh and blood of demons. He was capable of breaking through any defense and served as a reliable companion for his master. The Doerg perfectly understood the cunning woman's motivation, but he did not expect her to admit it. Of course, the golden dragon sought to gain superiority over the demon race. Death at the hands of Aiden did not frighten the king of hell at all, so he calmly gave the sword to his ward. When the boy's hands touched the artifact, he found himself in another world again. This time it looked much scarier than the last. The smell of sulfur and the surrounding scenery immediately led the young man to believe that hell was before him. As soon as he realized this, he immediately heard laughter, loud and eerie. The sword called itself the Destroyer of Destinies and said that it was created from the hatred that spreads throughout the world. But as his master, who had accepted him as such, he promised complete protection. Once back at the dining room counter, Aiden finally caught his breath. Of course, he could feel the incredible power that such a weapon radiated. But the darkness lurking within the artifact still confused him. To cement the merger, Durg immediately suggested testing the sword in practice. Half an hour later, they were already racing towards their destination, along with the goddess, who refused to go. Her persistence irritated the king of hell, especially since she had taken his place. That wasn't the main thing. It was necessary to explain to the hero what awaited him. On the quest board, Durg saw a quest about the disappearance of people in the mountains who were going to work in the mines. The mentor believed it was the work of several goblins, so the young man must have perceived it as a kind of entertainment. Having resolved organizational issues, Aiden unexpectedly started a conversation about the Demon King. He was amazed by the perseverance of the monster, who, despite defeats, continued to fight. The young man perceived the demiurge as the cause of all the troubles in the world. The mentor supported him in this statement, because he also asked himself this question almost every day of his stay on Earth. The companion listened in amazement to Durg's answers, not believing that he could be so altruistic. The trio traveled the rest of the way in silence, listening to the beautiful sounds of nature around them. Finally, the cart arrived at the location. Aiden simply saw before his eyes the same mines in which people disappeared. As usual, after a short speech, the king of hell fell asleep. The goddess, stopping the hero at the last moment, gave him some reinforcement. The guy felt it immediately. An incredible surge of energy filled his entire body. The woman simply didn't want the young man to die and deprive her of another trump card. Now that his wounds were no longer bothering him, Aiden moved like a bullet train. Very quickly, he reached the entrance to the man-made caves, but there was no one around. This led to the idea that the reason for the disappearances of local workers was not goblins at all. Next to him, the boy saw someone's armor and weapons. They were completely clean, with no traces of blood, as if they had just been removed. And also, there were feathers lying almost everywhere in the clearing. As soon as the young man picked up one of these, something strange happened. The sounds of a song began to come from the depths of the forest. In an incredible way, this strange melody attracted his attention, arousing a desire to know the source. Unable to resist the call, Aiden went into the thicket of trees. He thought that the cause might be ordinary people who would soon become victims of monsters. As he ran closer and closer, he began to realize that he was hearing a woman's voice. The hero stepped out into the clearing and saw dozens of men kneeling before the source of the sound. This picture shocked the young man. He did not understand what was happening. It was indeed a woman singing, but she was unusual. Only the head was female in this monster. The rest of the body belonged to the bird. Staring at the creature, Aiden didn't notice that he was already surrounded. Meanwhile, the goddess, who had been watching the boy from afar, informed the Durgus that he had encountered the harpies. She explained what these creatures were, emphasizing their kinship with the king of hell. They used their songs to lure and play with their prey before destroying it, and now Aiden was in great danger, for he was unable to resist the spells of these monsters. Despite the explanation, Durg was still in no hurry to save his ward. The same, in turn, has completely lost his sanity and thrown away his weapon. Now he was only concerned with the songs, which were becoming more and more enchanting with every passing second. He wanted to stay in this clearing forever. Suddenly, the Destroyer of Fates activated on its own. He charged and cut off the head of the nearest harpy. This destroyed the spell with which she hypnotized the victim she had chosen for herself. From now on, Aiden saw everything as it really was. The Destroyer of Fate was in his hand in a second. The boy had no idea of the sword's capabilities. It seemed that the artifact itself was telling him exactly what to do now. The harpies, meanwhile, redoubled their efforts to re-hypnotize the hero. But the Doomsday Destroyer's screams were much louder, and this helped the master to remain conscious. The sounds of the artifact became increasingly powerful, and eventually they seemed to fill the entire forest with themselves. Such an extraordinary sound wave freed all the harpies from their heads in an instant. In order not to get injured yourself, you had to hide behind some obstacle. Doomsday immediately came in handy, covering the ruler in a second. The power of these two artifacts filled Aiden's body with unprecedented strength. When everything was over, the young man finally had a chance to look out and see everything around him. Not a single monster remained on the horizon, even the remains had rotted away. The men, imprisoned by the spell, gradually began to come to their senses. They looked at each other in shock until someone pointed a finger at the boy behind them. Everyone immediately understood who he was, a hero who saved many lives today. The despair and fear in the clearing changed to happiness and gratitude. Watching how the former receptionist coped, the goddess decided to warn the Dorg. In her opinion, the king of hell should have been more careful in his behavior with his ward. He had extraordinary abilities and a proven high level. But these arguments did not seem weighty in the interlocutor's mind. He openly showed his superiority through thoughts of a possible confrontation, which embarrassed him. Suddenly, the conversation turned again to the reasons that guided Durg when he left his post. The goddess was troubled by this topic and wanted to find out what the guy's worldview really was. And she was very annoyed that the king of hell was in no hurry to satisfy this interest. Even arguments about the promise he made didn't work. In the end, the golden dragon really lost interest in this topic. She was quite satisfied with simple communication with a representative of an unfriendly race. Throughout the entire period of confrontation and great wars, the woman had no experience communicating with the king of hell. But as it turned out, they had a lot in common: experiences, feelings, and thoughts. Now the goddess was more interested in whether all incarnations of the demiurge had always been the same as the current one. The young man admitted that his predecessor was not very creative. He was orthodox to the bone, so much so that Durg's jaw dropped 80 years ago. It would be fair to say that if everyone followed this strategy, perhaps the Great War would remain a distant memory. The goddess herself was already noticeably tired of playing the same role. The unexpected revelation pleased Durgus so much that he began to call for a new life. The young man promoted peace on earth, which everyone around him only dreamed of, in which he and the golden dragon were not enemies, but simply interlocutors. Instead of cyclical suffering, one could simply enjoy beautiful things. But the guy's logic didn't clash with universal laws. There had to be a balance in everything, which the king of hell broke with his escape. And the goddess understood perfectly well that this would not go unnoticed by higher powers. This thought affected her so much that the woman decided to leave Durg. Finally, however, noting that this moment would remain in her memory forever. Simple and sincere communication with the enemy had never even occurred to her until that moment. The Golden Dragon believed that in 20 years, higher powers would force the young man to fulfill his duties. Therefore, most likely, this reincarnation of the King of Hell will also not last long. But the boy himself had a different opinion about his future. He wanted to live forever. But he planned to repeat similar dialogues with the woman more than once. On this note, Aiden intervened in the conversation, finally reaching the mentor. He was happy that he had escaped death. Throwing a red scarf to the King of Hell in farewell, the goddess smiled. According to her, it was a gift to replace the terrible necklace around Durg's neck. She disappeared into the portal while the boy tried to figure out what was wrong with his appearance. The attention of the King of Hell switched to his ward, who happily waved in front of his face a new confirmation of mission accomplishment. The new cash reward turned out to be substantial and ensured a decent life for several months. On the way to the armory, the King of Hell decided to take a nap, so he settled into his prime position. The incredibly beautiful nature enchanted him, like a fabulous, unreal universe. Aiden delivered his mentor safely and said a polite goodbye. Already at home, settled into a cozy bed, Durg smiled happily. But the rest didn't work out because Alex came to the room. He ignored the ruler's objections, for he had extremely important news. It turned out that Maurice was dead, and the search could be considered finally completed. According to the demon, he poisoned himself because he had become a burden to the King of Hell. At least that's what he said. From that moment on, only 6 Dukes of Darkness remained in the underground kingdom. His brother's actions didn't fit Alex's mind. He suspected that someone was pulling his strings, and only one creature, besides the King of Hell, was capable of this: the Golden Dragon. Although the goddess was with the Durg all this time, it meant nothing. She had doubles. Understanding the woman's possible treachery instantly made the ruler forget about his fatigue. But first, it was necessary to give a dignified burial to our comrade. The capital of the underground kingdom was considered the city of Eidos. It had a gloomy and majestic beauty. It was there that the burial of Maurice, one of the Dukes of Darkness, took place. The procession looked impressive. It couldn't have been otherwise. The deceased was one of the chosen ones. In the front rows, along with the King of Hell, walked the other 6 Lords of Darkness. Although Durg was not pleased with his subordinates' actions, he still felt pain. Maurice's death should not have gone unpunished. The entire kingdom was in mourning, awaiting new decisions from its young ruler. The Duke's body was placed in a coffin bound with chains, which was passed around by a procession. Finally, the remains were swallowed by the earth's core, and those present watched as the lava slowly consumed the tree. Soon, all that remained of the great Poison Lord were memories. When the solemn ceremony was over, the Deorg immediately hurried to leave the underground kingdom. He didn't even pay attention to the other lords, who were unhappy about this. Alex left Hell with the Lord, leaving his brothers to languish with nothing to do. The most dissatisfied with this was the Duke of Wrath, named Ralph. Samuel, the Duke of Laziness, immediately realized that his colleague was simply jealous because he was being kept aside. Ralph really wasn't happy with the policy of Durg staying on Earth and was curious about what he was doing. Not only Samuel noticed this, but also the twins, the Duchess of Lust, Annabelle and Lucille. The fact that the immortal succubi opened their mouths in his direction greatly angered the Duke of Wrath. Their mocking tone was unacceptable to him, and they in turn mocked him even more, which caused Ralph to flare up like a match, literally engulfed in flames, and offer a fight. The giant considered himself better than the girls because he was created earlier and looked like a giant. Only Samuel, who had authority among those present, could stop this dispute. A strange and cunning Lord of Envy, he preferred to stay out of petty squabbles. Like the Duke of Gluttony, who was almost always busy filling his stomach. There was absolutely no harmony among those present in this room. They needed a firm, ruling hand. Unaware of anything, Aiden, meanwhile, slept peacefully in his rickety house. Suddenly, he felt someone's presence and opened his eyes. Durg sat at his feet, silently watching the boy. When the realization that this was not a dream reached the young man's brain, the King of Hell ordered him to calm down. He didn't come here to observe any formalities, Looking more closely at the guest, Aiden noticed the mourning ribbon on his sleeve. The Daorg confirmed that he had just returned from the funeral of someone close to him. This eccentric was different from anyone the King of Hell knew, and his departure was completely unexpected. Now, all the thoughts of the ruler of the underground kingdom were occupied with revenge. He could only think about how he would blossom with the golden dragon for the painful loss. From his perspective, the evidence was concrete, and this time her murder was inevitable. With the death of Maurice, Durg discovered a side of his character that was responsible for the value of family. Now he clearly felt that no one had the right to act in this way towards his loved ones. Revenge could turn out unpredictably, and the guy decided to warn his ward about his absence. He was to disappear from sight for an indefinite period, and Aiden was to remain as the store manager. In the event of his final absence, the hero was to take full control of the armory. It was a kind of oral will that really scared the former receptionist. But the King of Hell did not want to continue the conversation or explain anything in more detail. He flew into the sky like a red star, a comet that suddenly changed trajectory. The revenge was to be completed today. Everyone had to know that his sphere of interests could not be encroached upon. Along the way, the plots of fragments of meetings with the goddess changed before the eyes of the King of Hell, during which she always said something about some rules and laws, but as it turns out, she herself was hypocritically violating them. The Golden Dragon's insidious plan fooled even a boy who never trusted others. Now he was eager to show her his true face, to discourage her from playing games forever. Because of the carousel in his head, the rage inside him had built up so much that everyone felt it. Purebreds who were in close proximity, and so, at a great distance from the King of Hell, they heard the call of blood. It was like a collective consciousness. Even in the only holy city on earth, they realized that something strange was happening. The Holy Lord personally felt the breath of darkness in his soul. The Holy Emperor had never experienced anything like this during his tenure, and it was unsettling. Meanwhile, the King of Hell had already reached the Temple of the Dragon Goddess. At first glance, everything there was as neglected as it had been when he had left. But upon closer inspection, Durg clearly felt the presence of the curtain. Coming closer and grabbing her with his fingers, he resolutely tore the obstacle apart. An incredible picture opened before his eyes. Thousands of dragons were flying around. This was their world. The invasion of a stranger caused a furor among the winged monsters. For many years before, they believed that such a scenario was absolutely impossible. But here, before them stood the living embodiment of the opposite, a boy demanding a meeting with the goddess. This caused even more outrage from residents and even an attack, because human form misled dragons. They believed that this would finally put an end to the uninvited guest. But the destruction of the body only prompted the King of Hell to take more active action. In front of the amazed audience, he began to change his appearance. There was a powerful explosion of energy that released his true essence. They began to turn away from the dragon's bright stream of light because it hurt their eyes. But soon the stranger's true appearance caught the attention of all the winged lizards. Now the Daorg demanded complete obedience from those present, or death awaited them. In response, the dragons decided to attack a second time, and it was a mistake. Shielding itself from the pillar of energy with its wing, the demon remained completely unharmed. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers, after which the attacker was split in two, as were all those who had connived at him and were close to him. After the second snap of the fingers, the dragon carcasses split into several pieces. And after the third one, they started turning into assorted meats. The fourth snap of his fingers ground them up like a meat grinder. Individuals who were at a distance, seeing this terrible sight, rushed to defend the kingdom. To the dirge, it seemed that was all that was needed. He wasn't opposed to killing anyone who wanted to die today. With one breath, the King of Hell gradually destroyed the enemies around him. They didn't have time to do anything, but they were already losing their heads. The dragon's defenses were collapsing before their eyes at a rate they had never experienced before. Having shed rivers of blood, which even caused a rainbow to appear in the sky, the Durgus once again called out to the goddess. One of the wounded soldiers, however, managed to escape to warn of the danger. Along the way, he shouted to everyone he met that an intruder had invaded their land, single-handedly destroying armies. Having reached the elders, the survivor told everything in detail, not hiding the smallest details. He demanded that the most respected person avenge his relatives and comrades, and the latter immediately went to the call. He sent a message to the other clans as well, so that the rest of the elders also join in defending the state. The sacred order had been violated, so the villain had to be punished. With calls for murder, a powerful new army set out to eliminate Durg. Even the White Jade, a clan that had always preferred to remain neutral to violence, became active. It was a matter of survival, so all principles had to be left for later. The appearance of an unknown killer and mass casualties were considered a violation of the sanctity of this world. The elders insisted that here they were under the protection of the goddess, so blood could not be shed. But the entire life of the King of Hell could be called sacrilege. For him, that was no argument. The guy just laughed in response, repeating his request. The giant dragon could not stand such impudence and clamped its powerful jaws on the enemy's body. He held his victim tightly as he continued to tell her about the rules of this place. But the creature's strength could not compete with the might of the Demon King. Opening the monster's mouth, the Daorg activated one of his techniques. A pillar of flame pierced the elder's torso through and through, causing incredible pain. The subordinates growled in shock, but still did not engage in open confrontation. The dragon opened its jaws and the demon broke free. The giant was still alive, so as a lesson to the others, Durg decided to finish him off. One snap of the fingers split the opponent in half. The two parts of the elder fell to the ground at a distance from each other. Only after that did his subordinates simultaneously attack the opponent, but their attempts were stopped by the remains of such a respected warrior. After which, one by one, the attackers began to fall to the ground. This was done on the silent order of the killers. They simply could not control their bodies. The King of Hell turned the deaths of all who decided to stand against him into a horrific spectacle. Finally, one of the dragons realized that they were not facing an ordinary person, but a real demon. The Durg gladly explained that he was the most important of the underground kingdom. Then he repeated his finger-snapping trick. All the previously killed individuals suddenly rose into the sky. With a wave of the hand, their remains merged into something incredibly terrifying and disgusting. Seeing their relatives and friends in such a state, the living could not help but be angry. Mocking their reaction, the demon remarked that he had now created the strongest dragon in the world, because he is also considered a creator. And if this most powerful creature is also a dragon, then he himself should be considered a dragon god. The horror after these words proved stronger than all the courage that still remained in the hearts of the witnesses. They rushed to flee, hoping that they could avoid the consequences for themselves. But the King of Hell wasn't going to let them go so easily. He enjoyed wreaking havoc. On command, the newly created creature began to kill its relatives. And only when this happened did the golden dragon finally appear. She saved as many of her children as she could, and she began to demand an immediate end to the killings. The Daorg smiled bloodthirsty in response. Now he was not interested in the others. The woman seemed to be genuinely outraged by the visitor's behavior and did not understand the reasons. Her subordinates quickly realized that their mother had done unacceptable things, for which they were now being punished. They demanded justice for themselves and accountability from her for her bad deeds. The first thing the golden dragon did was destroy the monster that the demon had spawned. It turns out that the goddess had the power to instantly kill enemies, the same as her opponent. She wanted only one thing: peace for her children, which Durg ridiculed with particular pleasure because he considered her the cause of the misfortunes of his own descendants. The one who now stood before him was the culprit of the deaths that had befallen all nations. The King of Hell only wanted revenge, which he informed his opponent about. He didn't want to talk. The first attack caught the goddess by surprise. She barely managed to avoid the blow. The Daorg was indeed extremely strong. He was able to destroy the veil that had kept them peaceful for many thousands of years. A duel in this world could result in extremely high casualties, so it was necessary to change the location. Thanks to her power, the golden dragon moved them both into her subconscious. Here they could do whatever they wanted without causing critical destruction and suffering to its people. The goddess was amazed that the King of Hell had managed to find and pierce the veil of their world. None of her opponents had managed to do this before, and she probably became less vigilant. The woman claimed that she considered the relationship between the guy and herself to be warmer and more trusting. But Durg perceived this as manipulation at his expense. He was interested in the goddess's next plans regarding the demons, but she did not understand what she was talking about. Therefore, the jokes were discarded. It was time to move on to active actions. The dark energy flew rapidly towards the opponent. Thus began the battle between two rulers who had recently been considered allies. The first blow missed the golden dragon. Now it was her turn. She decided to use the golden prison against her opponent. The maneuver turned out to be quite successful, and the target was completely captured in the vice. The prison was to explode along with the prisoner, with no possibility of release. But something went wrong. The King of Hell burst out even angrier than he had been before. The power of the opponent impressed the woman, just as Aiden's rank had recently. Not allowing the goddess to recover from her state of shock, the Durg immediately attacked her with a deadly technique. And then another one. He saw a woman trying to escape dark matter with her strength. It seemed to dance in the air, constantly changing its trajectory. And although the golden dragon suffered minor damage, she felt that this duel was destroying the world. The kingdom was on the verge of destruction, but that was precisely why it was not the time to give up. She ran forward with the faith that the light would help her overcome the darkness. And indeed, despite the powerful storm of dark energy, the woman managed to get as close as possible. The Durg appreciated this. He perfectly understood his capabilities and knew that this was evidence of the goddess's power. But it was difficult to call such an achievement a victory, because he had another trump card up his sleeve that he wanted to use. The explosion of the dark soul unleashed an even greater flood of darkness that was impossible to contain. Fear flashed in the golden dragon's eyes for the first time. A moment later, a powerful pillar of dark energy appeared in the sky above the dragon flocks. They immediately growled, realizing that this was a bad signal. The Durg soon appeared unharmed, with the hand of their mother, the great golden dragon. Seeing the severed limb, the children growled in grief for their goddess, like orphans. When the initial shock wore off, the King of Hell threw his hand down. This was received with hatred by everyone around. Picking up the jewel, the oldest of those who remained swore an oath. While the King of Hell opened the curtain to penetrate the world of humans, the winged creatures swore to remember this crime for eternity and take revenge. Curses rained down on his back, but no one took any active action. Durg was not at all frightened by such arrogant words. Any curse was no more terrible than his former life. The guy just flew away, leaving ruins behind. Faithful Alex was already waiting for him near the temple. He was the first to receive news of the revenge and expressed gratitude for the mercy shown. But the King of Hell no longer wanted to associate himself with the world and the fate that had been foretold for him. He wanted to live a better life in the world of humans, under the name Lord Durg Deus. But he didn't want to listen to the objections on this subject that were already falling from Alex's lips. Today's revenge was because Maurice was a valuable family member to him, nothing more. But despite the order to return to the village, the Duke still insisted on resolving one issue. The future crackdown on dragons will 100% have consequences for the entire demon race. And since Durgus did not intend to remain their ruler, he left them defenseless. And they don't do that to family members. Alex's manipulation was nipped in the bud. The young man was not going to participate in losing battles. All the demon's attempts to escape from the underworld seemed impossibly childish to the boy, but only the ruler believed so. The subordinates, who desired him, preferred another. While he lived in the categories of human affairs, Alex's eyes still continued to twitch. The Duke could not understand how to win over the Durg to his side. All that remained was to demand the appointment of a new Duke to replace Maurice. It was impossible to resolve this issue without the participation of the King of Hell. Each of the lords thought extremely highly of himself and would not have been able to vote for anyone else. Not wanting to spend much time on this, Durg ordered a search for Maurice's son. This ended the unpleasant dialogue. Sometime later, the King of Hell finally arrived at his armory. He was tired and still angry. Even the soft bed didn't lift the boy's spirits. Despite his condition, he immediately felt the goddess appear behind him. The woman walked through the portal, noting her partner's impeccable work. At the moment when it was possible to end everything in one fell swoop, a dialogue took place between the opponents. In the human world, it was impossible to wield powerful demonic power and remain unnoticed. Therefore, everything had to be explained verbally. Durg still considered the woman to be the culprit of what had happened. The golden dragon replied that she had come to the conclusion of obvious deception. They were both victims of some cunning plan. The goddess knew the story with Maurice from the very beginning, which is why she followed the actions of the king of hell. Only when the Durg appeared in her kingdom and began executing people did she realize that he was not guilty. The rulers of both nations were used blindly, creating a war before its time. That's why the woman decided to stage her death, so it would be easier to find out the truth. It was because of the destruction of the dragon goddess that the conspirators could begin to make mistakes. All that remained was to wait and carefully observe what was happening around. Of course, it was about conspirators among the dragon people. The rest could be found out later. The king of hell immediately realized that without his help in this matter, the end would be bad. And for some reason, he didn't want the golden dragon to die like that if she wasn't guilty. Thus, a new alliance was formed, stronger than the previous one. It was decided to forget all past grievances, even recent ones, for the sake of a common goal. Each nation lost precious members of its society, and it was proposed to disperse on this basis. Once the parties reached a consensus, the conversation focused on the future. The woman made a statement that starting tomorrow, she will join the Durga group and will act as a magician. Pretending to be human will make it easier to be around and not arouse suspicion. To avoid being recognized by those who had already seen her, the goddess promised to use a cunning spell. Although the king of hell didn't really like the idea, this move allowed him to keep the woman in sight. They said goodbye with hope for fruitful cooperation and a quick result. Meanwhile, mourning began at the Holisteracia estate. Duchess Emily, Sam's wife, was brought the remains of her husband and son. And she didn't know how to live on. The loss was too painful and prevented her from controlling herself. She didn't even care that the family palace was crumbling before her eyes. People could not cope with such a volume of work. The family needed more people willing to help. The manager who tried to console the woman. I decided to take advantage of the situation and take on the role of the leader. Being in a vulnerable position, she approved of this, despite her husband's possible selfish motives. The conversation was unexpectedly interrupted. The frightened manager tried with all his might to keep himself in check. When the stranger in the cloak appeared, he fought only with the desire to run away from the world. The man introduced himself as an inspector of the Holy Empire named William. This position was well known to a representative of the genus Holisteracia. The inspectors counted only 12 sacred swords. These people stood guard over order throughout the world, maintaining balance. Warriors whose level exceeded the highest, D+, were popularly called the Knights of the Zodiac. The manager fell to his knees, bowing respectfully to the newcomer and inquiring about the reason for his arrival. And William immediately began to explain the situation, which had begun a few weeks ago. He informed his interlocutors about the destruction of the heart of the Verde Kingdom. The unknown force that caused this and the appearance of a dragon hunter with the behavior of an exhibitionist. The appearance of dragons that attacked people gradually sowed chaos in the world. The two competing forces of good and evil, appearing simultaneously, generated suspicion. That's why he was sent from the Holy City, to find out what humanity is dealing with, but to neutralize the danger if necessary. The pursuit of the dragons he had planned had brought him here. The machinations of the Holistura family, large-scale poaching and dragon kidnapping, became known. This information frightened the two listeners who were involved. The evidence that the so-called gossip was true was the condition in which the palace was located. And any excuses from the perpetrators were not taken into account. William politely addressed Duchess Emily. He said that he would definitely report the serious crime to her family. This will deprive them of all the privileges of wealth and property that have been acquired for thousands of years. Emily, accustomed to a different existence, will experience all the horrors of hardship. Anticipating pleas for mercy, William asked for silence, as he had not yet finished his speech. He was well aware that the once grand family had a young heir. Therefore, the Knight of the Zodiac promised to come back for him when he turned 20. Thus, the Holy City will receive a new warrior from a noble family. Which always seems impossible, and with this, Callisturation atones for its sins. In addition to the above, the Inspector of the Holy Empire demanded a list of all participants in the conspiracy. Having said everything he wanted, the visitor calmly left the dilapidated hall. The noble listeners did not dare to rise from their knees until William's steps were swallowed up in silence. They understood that their lives had just been saved by chance. In the morning, as the goddess promised, a beautiful female magician, a new employee, visited the armory. Alex was the first to melt at the sight of her, in front of the surprised Durg. Aiden, who came up a little later, also did not recognize the golden dragon at all. The guys acted as if they were seeing their interlocutor for the first time, and the conspirator never ceased to be amazed by this. Realizing that there would be no exposure, the King of Hell relaxed and decided to leave matters to his subordinates. But halfway there, he was stopped by the voice of the goddess, who was now known to everyone as Goldie. She decided to take her partner to a special place. They found themselves in the forest, and Durg could not understand why he was being distracted from his important rest. Approaching the cliff, the King of Hell saw before him a dragon egg, in which a baby was maturing. This caused a new round of scandals between high-ranking representatives of different nations. The guy continued to encourage the woman to take independent, decisive actions regarding her children. But they defended themselves, as always, by reminding him of the peace treaties and laws. Even a human body could not save the golden dragon from punishment in case of arbitrariness. It was categorically impossible to attract the attention of higher powers. Destroying high-ranking heroes in a short amount of time would be considered an atypical case. Such a special phenomenon will definitely attract the attention of the gods, and the punishment may be terrible. This argument made Durg reflect on his fate, due to the decisions he was making. The young man did not understand why he had still not been punished for the many dragon lives he had taken. The conversation was interrupted by the cracking of an eggshell. The newborn hatched and began to emerge from its cocoon. It was necessary to immediately flee to a safer place. The golden dragon insisted on continuing the observation. She didn't explain the reasons why she needed to do this. Instead, she simply told me to wait. And now, the giant winged killer finally appeared above the trees. He was a representative of a radical group that was being persecuted by the goddess. Now she clearly saw who was in front of her, an obsidian dragon named June. When the location of the dislocation was reached, the flying lizard transformed into a woman. She was a tall brunette with a somber beauty and a haughty expression. She approached the newborn and began to examine him closely. The Durg realized that this madwoman was not planning to infect the little dragon with the same fungus. This was perhaps logical, as dragons grew to large sizes in a matter of minutes. But it also suggested that certain individuals of this nation were particularly cruel. The goddess and the King of Hell could only watch what was happening. If you control your emotions and focus on the goal, you can learn information about the leader. Soon, the flapping of the wings of several more adults was heard. And indeed, 2 dragons appeared above the clearing, clearly aiming to descend. They were a man and a girl from the same clan as June. Their names were Julia and Scott. The conspirators immediately emphasized that no one was pursuing them, because there was no one left. From now on, this world belonged to the radicals, because the golden dragon died in battle with the demon. June noted that there was no reason for joy yet, because God had yet to appoint a new head. Taking on the position of golden dragon on his own would not be a wise decision. Therefore, it was necessary to focus on the main work that needed to be done. The newborn made a sound and all attention shifted to him. Scott moved closer to the creature. Having taken out the precious cargo from the folds of his clothes, he wanted to do exactly what the observers feared. A flask with fungal spores appeared in his hand. And at that moment the goddess could not help herself. She did not understand why her children would commit such madness. The King of Hell wanted to take action right now. He saw no point in waiting, because everything was clear anyway. But the woman was against it. The golden dragon did not believe that her children acted independently. She wanted to continue observing. The young man did not like philosophical conversations about tragic victims. He adhered to a practical point of view and was an active opponent of simple contemplation. Durg suggested, as an option, kidnapping the conspirators and torturing them, finding out the necessary information. After a few seconds of consideration, the golden dragon gave her consent. It was at this time that Scott entered the final stage of infection. He opened the flask. The fungal spores began to slowly spread. All he had to do was find a host. But unexpectedly, the dragon's own hand disappeared from his sight. It was the work of the King of Hell. This action saved the newborn from transformation, and Daorg himself got a great opportunity to make a spectacular appearance. June fired an energy beam at the newly arrived enemy, ordering her subordinates to flee. The demon absorbed the attack effortlessly, along with the author who created it. In an instant, the obsidian dragon disappeared, no longer posing any threat. The shocked henchmen had no choice but to flee. They rushed in all directions, hoping that the enemy would not catch up with them and that there would be a chance to warn the others. But the King of Hell decided who to fly after first, because he could easily catch up with both of them. Having set a primary goal for himself, the boy lifted off the ground and flew rapidly into the sky. Scott was flying at maximum speed. He could not understand how their location was found. Everything indicated that among the ranks of the radicals, after all, there were traitors. The unexpected appearance of the King of Hell before him made all suspicions disappear from his mind. First, it was necessary to deal with the mortal danger. Scott decided to attack first to buy himself some time. But the opponent turned out to be much faster than him, so the fight actually didn't happen. The wounded dragon flew down, losing blood and vitality, and the King of Hell set out for his second goal. Julia was considered the fastest among the cast of conspirators. She believed that with such a gap, nothing would threaten her anymore if Scott sacrificed himself. She had a great chance of survival. The sudden appearance of a chase on her tail worried the girl and made her move even faster. As the Durg flew closer, Scott's blood was visible on his fingers. Whatever could indicate the latter's death, for Julia, it was a painful loss. As a result, the girl lost control, slowed down, and attacked her opponent. But no matter how hard she tried, it was impossible to catch up with the super-fast King of Hell. The young man seemed to be mocking her, creating incredible turns, but changing the trajectory by 180 degrees. Finding himself in a more advantageous position, Durg activated the chains of the wasteland to capture his prey. Out of nowhere, chains began to appear through the portals, enveloping the opponent in a matter of seconds. Julia began to rapidly lose height and could not do anything about it. Sometime later, the prisoners awoke from a heavy sleep. Julia was the first to start resenting being shackled hand and foot. Scott followed suit as best he could, for his injury had taken away his voice. The prisoners' attention focused on the King of Hell, who stood nearby with a smile. The red-haired dragon rushed towards him as far as her chains would allow and began to curse. But Durg was not impressed by this behavior, so he decided to proceed with the interrogation. The first question was about the flask of mycelium he was holding in his hand. Julia started shouting that she wasn't going to answer the thief's questions. But he rightly noted that it was the conspirators who stole the fungus first. In response, the dragon turned on its arrogance and refused to answer any questions. This scenario was stored in Durg's head, so he knew how to get out of this situation. With a sharp movement of his hand, he pierced Scott's abdominal cavity, and he screamed in pain. Grabbing his victim by the first organ he could find, the King of Hell clenched his fist. The man's torment became almost unbearable, and he could not escape it. And due to damage to his vocal cords, even screaming was an unattainable dream. Julia rushed from her captivity to help her brother and offered herself as a victim. But this was the cunning of the King of Hell's plan. He had no intention of touching the girl. He began to threaten the red-haired conspirator that he would mock all her loved ones. And until she tells him everything he cares about, someone will continue to suffer before her eyes. To prove his words, Durg repeated his previous actions with even greater zeal. Julia shouted that their organization had no outside leaders. They did everything on their own accord. The red dragon named June the leader. Hearing this, the boy was even happy because it meant that he had cut off the Hydra's head. But the interlocutor continued to insist that they were not just radicals. A separate organization, called the Four Seasons, acted more decisively to defend its interests. The Demon King only had to find out the list of members of the sect of frostbitten winged monsters. In response, the surprised Durg heard a list of names derived from the names of the months. 12 members of the group, in this case, were known to him. To the boy's surprise, these were not nicknames, but real names given at birth. According to Julia, it happened completely by chance, and the name was chosen because of this coincidence. But Durg couldn't believe that such things could happen without careful planning. Even this grouping was part of the global picture of some game. Although the captive did not share this opinion, insisting on her independence. According to the girl, they fought oppression from the people who had taken over the world that belonged to the dragons. Their newborns appeared on the land, sacred territory, and this indicated that humanity was the occupier. The King of Hell did not want to enter the jungle of territorial encroachments. He decided to move on to more practical questions about the nature of the fungus and Maurice's involvement in it. But unexpectedly, he fell silent, focusing on the object in his own hand. The mycelium was a different color. The fungus that Alex showed him was significantly different from the one he had now. The purple color changed to pink, indicating another infection. Questions were becoming more and more. It was necessary to find out whose hands this creation was. But Julia was unwilling to cooperate, despite the possible consequences. The torture was not repeated again. On the contrary, the woman was unexpectedly released. But in a moment, one of the chains wrapped itself around her neck, squeezing her throat tightly. The King of Hell did the same thing to her henchmen and transported the captives to the underworld. The frightened dragons saw millions of what could once have been called human figures below. The Durg called this place the bottom of the demon world, with souls that even hell would not accept. They ate only what was dumped here every few centuries. Now, Julia and Scott could well be potential food for these vile creatures. Given the woman's stubbornness, the executioner wanted to use the man's body first, and he simply let go of the stick with words about his terrible suffering. The confession immediately flew out of the sectarian's mouth. The suppliers were dwarves from the Southern Root clan. A moment later, Scott and Julia found themselves in the same clearing in the middle of the forest. They moaned in pain and terror, trying to support each other. The man was in complete pain. Finally, the golden dragon decided to appear before the captives. She demanded the truth. The appearance of the goddess, who had been torn apart almost in front of the entire people, surprised Julia. All dreams of a new world order turned out to be in vain. Ambitions were replaced by despair. But suspicion of collaboration with the Duke of the Demon World brought the captive out of her apathy. From the red-haired conspirator's point of view, it was the golden dragon who acted this way, and they were sinless. As the conversation reached a dead end, Durg decided to intervene. He absorbed both radicals, interrupting the mutual accusations. The interrogation was officially over. The mycelium sample was different from what it was before, so it was necessary to find out its nature. He threw the flask to the frightened goddess so that she could see with her own eyes that he was right. From Julia's words, it could be concluded that information should be sought from the dwarves. Despite the fact that they supposedly did not engage in such matters, the conspirator seemed sincere. Maurice's unexpected and suspicious death threw the tables. It seemed that somewhere nearby, an equally cunning schemer with a talent for poisons was wandering. But such a force could not go unnoticed, despite the secrecy and all the precautions. Therefore, the goddess was struck by the thought that the Duke of Darkness could have fooled them. The King of Hell immediately spoke out against this. He was personally at the funeral and trusted his own eyes. But the golden dragon bent its line, which, to be honest, seemed quite logical. Due to the disagreement of views, the dispute dragged on for a long time. The tangle of secrets seemed to grow even bigger instead of unraveling before our eyes. Too many participants, either voluntarily or through someone else's will, were included in this scenario. Moreover, since they didn't even belong to the same species, this game was played for many years in a row. Now the dwarves have also entered the arena, although they have always led a secluded lifestyle. It has been impossible to understand to this day who the ultimate beneficiary is in this story. All that remained was to move forward and gradually gather bits of information. At some point, it began to occur to the goddess and the Durgas that everyone around them was conspiring, except for them. The King of Hell decided not to waste time on small talk and find out more today. Now the research team's path will lead to the intricate caves of the dwarves. And indeed, towards evening, the mighty four approached the gate that marked their lands. But although it led to the possessions of the Southern Root clan, so far, they had not met anyone on the way. Along the way, Durg noticed the strange behavior of his companions towards the goddess. It was as if Goldie had cast some kind of spell on them that made them sympathetic. The King of Hell decided to change the subject of conversation by mentioning fungal spores. Alex noted that he had collected the samples during the battle with the first possessed and had kept them just in case. Later, he no longer paid attention to it, considering it a pointless activity. This complicated the situation because it was unclear how the fungus could have changed over time. Aiden, who was walking nearby, began to be more interested in what was happening than usual. Now the young man wanted to act consciously and know exactly what the team was looking for. The Dorg had to explain everything in general terms, of course, without mentioning the demons. This prompted the young man to delve into memories of the harm that loved ones had suffered because of their activism. The further he went, the more the creatures from the underworld aroused the boy's disgust and anger. Although Aiden had little experience, he had recently stopped being afraid of difficulties. The hero wanted to be useful to his mentor, whom he also considered one of the purebloods, more powerful. Looking at the purity of his ward's thoughts, Durg wanted it to remain in him forever. At times, the King of Hell even wished Aiden could live his life without his interference. Therefore, he delayed the process of declaring the hero at some points as much as possible. The company continued to move forward, but the road seemed to have no end in sight. It should be noted that the route was not always easy, and we had to climb a steep mountain. After several hours of such wandering, it was decided to make a short stop. None of the participants knew how long they still had to walk, not even Alex, because the dwarves were constantly digging. Durga was already starting to get annoyed by this situation. Behind their arguments, the comrades did not immediately notice that Aiden was unwell. It looked like the guy had been poisoned by something, but he was still a simple man. To find out the reasons, the demons and the goddess walked a little further and saw a striking picture. The poisonous gas killed hundreds of dwarves and spread through the dungeons. This was striking, because this was the people who were considered immune to such things. To be honest, even the King of Hell, deep down, acknowledged Maurice's possible involvement in this. But the time had come to save the ward, and that was what the team focused on. A moment later, after the intervention of the magician Goldie, the young man felt fine again. The woman assured him that this effect would last for some time and he could not worry about his condition. When it was time to move on, suddenly, a rock nearby exploded. An army of dwarves in gas masks ran out to meet the strangers. Everyone drew their weapons, including Aiden. The chief, among the local residents, inquired about the personalities of the visitors. They were considered to be those who spread poison in the lands of the Southern Root, and they threatened the violators with murder if it turned out in the conversation that this was true. The Daorg, realizing that the interlocutors were not particularly intelligent, began to confuse them. He wanted to know more information about the case before answering the questions. So the dialogue reached the term R24. Judging by the conversations of the dwarves among themselves, it was something dangerous. And the King of Hell clung to this name, insisting on an honest answer from the tunnel owners. It turned out that we were talking about the Sacred Gate, which had that name. The dwarves of the Southern Root dug in that direction constantly, despite the danger of this object. Those who were now talking to the four were representatives of the Western Root clan. They were investigating the spread of poison and found the dead. This indicated that both groups had common goals. And there was no point in fighting. All that remained was to decide in which direction to move. The place where R24 was located was found about 30 centuries ago, The gate was impossible to open. No one knew what was inside, although they tried to keep the find a secret. Recently, residents of the southern route set out to blow up the facility, and that changed everything. They didn't listen to anyone, which is why they started dying, and eventually, there wasn't a single representative left. But not everyone held this opinion, as rumors circulated about a man in black clothes with jewels. Judging by the description, it was about June, and this confirmed Julia's words about autonomy. This person was seen in the R24 zone, which was considered a sacred place, so he looked suspicious. When the main information was heard, the King of Hell began to insist on visiting the gate. No matter how you look at it, all the stories revolved around this artifact, and it needed to be investigated. But the dwarves were in no hurry to accompany the guests. They suggested they use the map. The four happily accepted the offer and decided to set off. The closer the endpoint got, the more poison seeped through the tunnel walls. Most likely, the suspicions of the Western dwarves were correct. The source was there. Soon, the concentration of the poison became so great that Aiden felt sick again. The human body could not withstand such loads, even with magic, so he could not continue with the team. The goddess ordered the boy to immediately return to where the air was cleaner. The rest of the team had to go ahead, even though they were worried about their comrade. Another 30 minutes passed, and the researchers came across a new chaotic burial. The gate was visible right in front of them. It was a huge structure made of some unknown material that looked futuristic. To Dorg's surprise, the golden dragon reacted as if it understood what it saw before it. But this was not the case. She was surprised because she had no idea what this object was created for. It turned out that the dwarves knew how to keep secrets, even from such ancient inhabitants of the planet. The contemplation was interrupted by the appearance of a stranger in a nearby tunnel. He ran away when he was spotted. No one had time to see his face. The King of Hell ordered Alex to immediately catch up with the schemer. Perhaps he was the main one. The Duke gave chase, carrying out the order without hesitation. Meanwhile, the goddess carefully examined the structure. Most likely, it was something from the ancient past, such as from a previous civilization, or even earlier, and that's what the golden dragon was leaning towards. That era was called the Golden Age. At that time, only humans lived on the planet. They were the main creators and inhabitants of the world. Thanks to their intelligence and technology, they managed to conquer the sky and even the stars. But it was because of their pride and greed that they defied the gods and destroyed themselves. The first people God wanted to see in the created world were people. But their sole rule quickly led to the demise of civilization, although they reached incredible heights. The war they caused the stronghold itself to boil, eventually plunging into complete darkness. According to legend, God was so saddened by the tragedy that he mourned for a long time. And in the end, he decided to create a new world in which people also lived, but without science. Magic replaced everything in this world and prompted it to another development, which was called the Silver Age. People had control over all the elements. They could create many beautiful things, but they still became extinct. Then 3 powerful clans entered into a fierce confrontation. People were obsessed with the idea of taking possession of magic stones, the source of magic, to rule the world. The tragic death of the children once again broke God's heart. And so, for the 3rd time, the Creator invented a world called the Age of Chaos. Here, humans did not exist alone, but in the neighborhood of dragons and demons and dwarves, which was supposed to balance them. The Earth was divided into 3 areas. Human, 1 continent on the surface, which was considered sacred. Shallow dungeons inhabited by dwarves who lived separately from others. Purgatory, the afterlife, or the underground kingdom where demons ruled with the demiurge at their head. And the dragon got the universe behind the curtain that remained after the Silver Age. And strangely enough, God's logic worked. The duration of this world's existence surpassed all previous ones. People survived despite obstacles. But it cost them the science and magic they had previously possessed. All this was given to the new representatives of the planet's population. Now the goddess and the King of Hell were, most likely, in front of the starship. Humanity flew far into the skies on such devices many thousands of years ago. Because of this, None of the locals could open what they called the gate. The ship's alloy was too strong. Only true blogs and angels had the knowledge to operate such machines. And Dorg was convinced of this when he decided to attack the artifact. Having considered himself invincible all his life, this was the first time he had encountered such power. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. The golden dragon stopped him, promising that she would do it faster and safer. And indeed, after a minute, the woman seemed to have found what she was looking for. She pressed on the metal, and the wall began to move apart, revealing a strange panel. The goddess, quickly orienting herself in place, began to enter some incomprehensible combinations of symbols. According to the golden dragon, she was currently busy restoring the ship's program. It couldn't be called magic. The technology could be explained much more simply. The king of hell watched the goddess in amazement, not understanding where she got such knowledge. She claimed to have learned this and promised the Durg the same knowledge in time. But the guy still didn't understand how this could happen. According to the goddess, the demon race has inherited the abilities of people from the Golden Age period. They worshipped fire and followed a code of strength, relying on which they conquered the world. The only problem was that Demiurge was always defeated in a great war and reborn. Most likely, that's why he lost this knowledge, mastery of technology as the main carrier of the nation. Dragons managed to adopt the abilities of people from the Silver Age. They possessed magic. And she helped them, both in everyday life and in more serious matters. Finally, the unknown panel was gone, and the system began to recover. And a minute later, the gate finally opened. Inside, as well as outside, everything looked very strange. But curiosity won out, so both henchmen crossed the threshold. It turned out that it was a flying warehouse of dry rations, that is, food for people, that flew into the sky. There could be no monsters here, and, in the opinion of the Golden Dragon, there was nothing to be afraid of. Approaching the control panel, the woman activated some kind of large projection. After studying the inscriptions, the goddess realized that she saw before her a list of 10 ships. This was evidence of the end of the Golden Age. Humanity was supposed to escape the planet on 10 arcs, one of which was this one. This unit was supposed to provide the survivors with the necessary amount of food for many years of travel. But most likely the plan didn't work, and the ships probably stayed here. The poison was not directly related to the technologies of the Golden Age, and the Golden Dragon was 100% sure of this. The guy, listening to her with his mouth open, finally realized that this woman had something to learn from. But the thought irritated him more than it intrigued him. The Durg didn't want to admit his mistakes, so he focused on catching the culprit who had escaped. He had almost exited the ship when a powerful beam nearly cut him in half. Looking at the hole in his hand, the King of Hell raised his head and saw an unknown monster on the ceiling. The goddess suspected that it was not a living creature, but a robot created by the people of that era.